I am the best pilot of the state. I used to half joke with my family. It was debatable, but close to truth. None could fly an Apache attack helicopter as I did in the Malmstrom Air Force Base, western Montana. That fact would usually earn me some favor. Better maintenance for my bird overseas, possibility to choose my posting, as well as, usually, more information than is offered to the other helicopter pilots during the briefings. Not this time. "Colonel Harper, you want me to go in blind?" I grumbled, not hiding my incomprehension. "You didn't even tell us where we are going." I had a few emergency takeoffs in my career, both as a training and during live combat. Every time, you have at least some information. Someone is attacking your base. A nearby convoy has been ambushed. Something. "I'm sorry, Hank." The look on Harper's face told me he was honest, at least regarding his regrets. "Can't tell you more. Just follow the procedure. More instructions will come once your squadron is in the air." "Is this a drill? Let me know at least this. Is there a terrorist attack somewhere?" Again, his face told me everything I needed to know. Harper did not know either what was going on. He took his orders from above, and nobody told him why Voodoo Squadron was being mobilized. It is not a drill. That's all I'm allowed to say. A creeping feeling went up my spine. Harper was the highest ranking officer regarding the defense of the base. Sure, there were some generals at Malmstrom, but everything that happened directly on the base had to go through Harper first. Everything. What kind of information or order did he receive to send his birds in the air without question? I did not insist. There was no point. I went with my men, reviewed the briefing quickly with them, and we all walked to the landing pads and to our Apaches. Even though the moon was paler and brighter than I remembered it to be, the sky was very dark, as if the very light itself was absorbed by the few black clouds above our heads.
"So what's up, Hank?"
asked my gunner Kim. She was the best damn gunner I had ever flown with, and she shot as she talked, straight to the point.
"What's really up, I mean?"
And there was no satisfactory answer, so I simply shrugged. She didn't seem happy with this lack of information, and was about to say something when I snapped my fingers to get her attention and made some eye movements to get her to look behind her. On the other side of the landing pad were two Black Hawk transport helicopters, already starting their rotor. They were our mission. The entirety of our official briefing could be summed up by "go in the air, stay with the Black Hawks." Every pilot supposed we would have to escort them while they drop a Spec Ops team of elite soldiers. However, those that went inside the helicopters did not look like regular Spec Ops.
"What in God's name?"
Kim's loud exclamation made the other pilots and gunners of Voodoo Squadron to look at the two Black Hawks. While the soldiers that went inside the helicopters were obviously part of the same unit, as indicated by their black and red uniforms, none of them had the same weapon as the other. One had something that could only be described as a musket with a scope. Another carried a surprisingly large automatic grenade launcher, while a mountain of a man was equipped with a crude-looking two-handed hammer.
"Who are those guys? Tier 1?
Whispered Warren, the pilot of Voodoo 2.
"No idea.
I quietly answered.
But I have a bad feeling about this. Eyes open, Voodoo. And be careful." "20 minutes later, our 4 Apaches and the 2 Black Hawks were in the air, flying north. The only additional order we received was to stay in formation with the 2 transport helicopters and to let them lead the way. If anything, we were clear to engage to protect the Hawks." "Clear to engage what?"
asked Kim, pragmatically.
"What are we expecting? Mantel missile launchers? AAA vehicles? Enemy flyers? I don't like this kind of order this close to Canada."
Continued Warren.
"What if they also send people at the same exact spot we are going?
wherever we are going. Do they want blue and blue? 'Cause that's how you get blue and blue.
The conversation stopped there, and a dreadful silence fell on our squadron. Voodoo 4 indicated some funky meteorological readings for a few seconds, and Kim failed to make a joke to ease the mood. But apart from that, we flight in radio silence. We went at low altitude, following valleys and rivers between forested hills and mountains. At first, there were still a few towns, then a couple of villages, and then some isolated houses high on the hills. Eventually, we arrived in an entirely wild area, with the trees shaking in the wind as the only sign of life. That's when I get a radio call by the lead Black Hawk.
Voodoo Squadron, we are closing in on our target. We'll deploy here. Stay low, weapon sought, and cover us. Once we hit the ground, take altitude and stay there. We'll contact you if we need you.
That was it. We were in the danger zone, and they still wouldn't tell us what to expect. I nonetheless spread out my squadron, forming a diamond around the Blackhawks to protect them from whatever could come.
Anything on the radar?
I nervously asked Kim.
Negative. Absolutely dark. The skies are ours.
This should have made me feel better, but for some reason, I felt worse. The forest seemed wrong somehow. There was absolutely nothing moving, either inside the forest or above. That made me realize something that froze my blood. We were flying in the middle of the night at low altitude over a wild forest. The threat of a lone animal flying inside the rear rotor was real. I was so focused on the mission that I didn't realize that yet. But
where are the birds?
I half whispered in the radio.
Come again, Voodoo Leader?
Asked Warren.
Where are the goddamn birds? We are alone in the skies. We are the only ones in the whole damn forest.
Kim, whose position was right in front of me in the cockpit of the Apache, turned her head back at me. The deep discomfort she felt very visible on her face. She had been scanning the area with her thermal optics since we got here, looking for any threat.
You're right, Hank.
She started, her radio still on.
There is nothing. No animal movement on the ground. Scratch that. I've got movement.
Shouted Warren.
In the trees.
Before I answered, I instinctively looked in the trees right in front of me. The wind was quite strong, but nothing special. I was about to turn my helicopter around to support Warren when I heard the click typical of my gunner activating the 30mm autocannon.
Got that too,
answered Kim. My eyes went again on the tree canopy, to no avail. My head-up display indicated where Kim was pointing her autocannon, so I focused my attention there. It was directly on our left, at our 10 o'clock, about 2 clicks from us. Something ungodly fast was jumping from branch to branch, tree to tree, straight at us. The speed of the thing made my heart stop for a second.
Holy, they are fast,
I screamed, trying to keep my calm.
I can barely see them.
It reminded me of how fast the smallest insects can fly or move. Except, this thing was huge, larger than an adult man. I could barely see the shape of it, but it was vaguely humanoid. Nothing about its movement, however, was human. Kim didn't wait for my authorization to open fire. The autocannon followed her vision, and she sent a full salvo on the path of the shadow. Trees were cut in two by the high-caliber explosives, and the silence of the woody valley was instantly replaced by a storm of fire and metal. With the nerves that Kim was famous for, she kept her precision perfect, far better than I could follow. With the amount of ordnance sent in the trees, one 30mm round had to touch the thing, sooner or later. But still, it went on.
Switch to Hydra.
I gave the order, even though it was probably useless. She knew what had to be done. Kim launched a whole volley of unguided rockets that utterly destroyed the approximate location of the shadow, less than a kilometer from our helicopter. While destruction reigned, I considered gaining altitude. It would have been safer, but a quick look showed that the passengers from the Blackhawks were still in the process of fast roping into the trees. I was, for the briefest of moments, amazed by some of their equipment. One had a shoulder-mounted mortar that started shelling as soon as he started going down the rope. And this other guy was carrying... was that an iron shield? A scream in the radio got me out of this instant of daydreaming.
This is Voodoo 3, going down hard.
Instantly, my head turned to the imperiled Apache. His rear motor was on fire, and the helicopter was spiraling out of control. There was a small explosion in the tail of the helicopter. The flames grew bigger, and I saw the black humanoid shape crawling on the side, going to the cockpit.
Voodoo 3, eject!
I shouted in the radio.
You have one on you. Jim, Will, eject! Negative,
answered Voodoo.
Instruments are non-responsive. I can't do anything.
The radio was cut short when I saw the impossible thing rip apart the cockpit, take both John and Will, and plunge with them back inside the forest, leaving the Apache spiraling down to the ground. I tried to open a long-range communication with Malmstrom Base, but for some reason, I only got white noise back. I tried a second frequency with the same result before giving up, for now. The creature that Kim tried to kill with the Hydra volley had reappeared from the burning inferno that is part of the hill it become, and was now going straight for the Blackhawks. A glance allowed me to see the strange Spec Ops had virtually finished their deployment.
Finish this thing, Kim.
I barked in the radio. From the side of my vision, I saw Voodoo 4 taking altitude while shooting its autocannon vertically, directly below us.
Ring Hellfire.
As one of the best pilots west of Denver, I had access to some cutting-edge equipment. My Hellfires were one of them. In their most basic form, they are tank-busting missiles, each packing enough punch to destroy a T-90 kilometers away. Mine were reinforced with thermobaric warheads and were made to raise fortified bunkers. That creature was going to be erased from existence.
Hank, I can't get a lock.
Kim was almost out of breath.
I have nothing on thermals. These things are cold. Then lock on the ground. Carpet bomb the area.
6 of the 8 missiles were launched in 2 seconds, each spreading to target a different area, all around the speeding freak. For half a second, a miniature sun lighted the valley as 6 thermobaric detonations obliterated the hill that the creature was rushing through. I compensated the close-range shockwave so that my Apache wouldn't be knocked out of the sky, while the 2 Blackhawks were thrown 100 meters away before they could stabilize. Apparently, some random trees busted into flames, victims of the thermal wave. Raging wildfires started to spread. But even then, the light of the flame seemed dimmed, and staring into the fire wasn't blinding. I couldn't explain the uneasiness that this brought upon me, but I felt cold. Very cold. Which, believe me, is not how you are supposed to feel when you unleash a volley of hellfire at point blank. The scream of Warren came next. It took me a few seconds to find his helicopter in the black skies. It was above us, according to my HUD, but I couldn't find out where he was. Even with the hellfire, I couldn't see a damn thing except those dark clouds.
Down. I repeat, going down. I am going...
I barely heard him in the radio, as if he was screaming from the other side of an auditorium. As the echoes of his voice rang in my helmet, I saw Voodoo 2 plummeting through the air as a rock, straight to the trees. His fuel detonated soon after he touched the ground, and a large explosion shook my helicopter. I took some altitude, partly because of the explosion of Warren's helicopter, partly because I started to climb to get away from this hell. We had risen by about 80 feet when I heard Kim gasping, my HUD indicating she was still looking at the general area of where the shadowy shape we bombarded with hellfire used to be. I could not see what she saw.
Holy mother of...
was all I heard from Kim before my Apache was thrown out of control. I could not tell if it was an impact or something just clammed aboard. I heard and felt Kim firing the autocannon, though I didn't understand what she was shooting at.
"We need to eject,"
she shouted, visibly losing all senses to panic.
"Not until we gain some distance,"
I replied.
"I'm not jumping into this."
Our Apache was cut in half. Right behind the cockpit, something tore the tail away. As Voodoo 2 before us, we plunged into the darkness below. I repeatedly pulled the ejection switch to no avail. There was no way we would survive that. I heard Kim scream, and my voice joined hers. I braced myself for impact and closed my eyes. When I opened them, I was still in the cockpit. Kim was unconscious in her gunner seat. Everything was dark outside, and I could not see more than 10 meters away, even with the wildfire that I could guess in the distance. I tried to wake up Kim by shaking her gently on the shoulder, but one of her bones made a very unpleasant sound, and I stopped. Looking more around, I noticed we had landed at the top of a huge tree. First, this tree was way larger than what is usual for the region, its vast branches twisted in impossible shapes. Second, even if it was made of the strongest wood, it should still collapse when half an armored helicopter fell on it. Either we fell slowly, or this was no wood. I took out my semi-automatic weapon and tried to get closer to the glass of the cockpit. I thought I saw something move in the distance, and I heard gunshots far, far away. Dread went up my spine, and I pushed my back against my seat. Something outside made a long, soft noise. Some sort of howl. Then, more gunshots, and an explosion. Just my luck. Now, I'm thinking frantically about my next steps. What should I do? Should I try to stay inside the helicopter and wait for rescue? Make a run for it? Try to get Kim out of the cockpit and down on ground level? Should I go towards the gunshots and try to help? Or away and hope this distraction will keep whatever lurks in the forest away from me? It was hard to keep track of time inside the cockpit of my crashed Apache helicopter. Kim, my gunner, would not wake up despite my best efforts. Whatever ripped our birds from the sky was still out there in the forest, and I didn't count on my M4 carbine to even slow it down. Even thermobaric hellfires didn't do much, apart from setting the trees on fire. What hope did I have? "Hank?" whispered Kim, starting to move. She was coming back to consciousness. I swiftly put my hand on her right shoulder, both to calm her down and to prevent her from doing unnecessary movements. "Don't move, Kim. You're hurt. We're on the ground. Crash landed on a tree. No immediate danger." That was pretty much all I could tell her. Light sources were dimmed here, almost to the point of being non-existent. I could barely see 10 meters outside of the cockpit, and all radio communications were down. Voodoo 4, the only Apache that I didn't see crash during the ambush, would not answer. Only white noise came back from Malmstrom Air Base. Kim and I were alone. "What?" Kim struggled to articulate. "What are those things?" "I have no idea," was the most honest answer I could try to give. Some sort of humanoid shadows, lightning fast and strong enough to jump onto a flying helicopter to rip apart the cockpit. I tried not to give too much thought to what they actually were. Until I got out of here, no reason to fall into despair or madness. "Let's not stay here to find out," I answered to my gunner. "Do you think you can move?" Kim grunted while she slowly moved her legs and arms one by one. I really feared that her left shoulder had been dislocated by the impact, but it turned out she was only lightly injured. This startled me, That I survived the crash almost unhurt was almost a miracle. The both of us were fine was too much to be a coincidence. Yeah, sighed Kim. I won't break my record time on a 100-meter sprint, but I can move. She gathered her stuff, including her own carbine, for about a minute. For now, the bulletproof glass of the cockpit was protecting us, even though we could not move easily. Once we would open the side doors of the cockpit to get out, we would be exposed, and we need to move fast. Wait a second, Hank. She was gathering her thoughts and started to look outside. There wasn't much to see, except for the tree our helicopter had crashed on. And now that she thought about it, how is this tree still standing? And what the hell is it? It looked like a massive onyx-colored oak tree. I couldn't even see the ground, so it must have been at least 15 meters high. No such tree existed in the region, and I didn't see such a thing when we were flying over the forest. How did we end up here? Before I could answer Kim's questions, we heard more gunshots. Once again, they seemed far away in the distance. But I knew that the air was not only dimming the light, it was also distorting sounds. For what I knew, the firefight could have been right at the base of the tree. Statics in the radio stopped. I got goosebumps as to what that could mean. But to my relief, it was a human voice. It was quite recognizable. The leader of the Spec Ops squad that fast-roped into the forest. Our mission was to escort them, but I assumed they all died shortly after touching the ground. Turned out I was wrong.
I repeat, Voodoo Leader, do you copy? Over.
I picked up the radio, not quite sure about what to expect. Was that another illusion? Another failure of reality to remain coherent?
This is Voodoo Leader.
I slowly said into the radio.
Are you guys still alive? The things that attacked us are unkillable and just so damn fast.
2 seconds went by without answers. 2 very, very long seconds. Kim managed to painfully turn around to watch me with anxious eyes, knowing very much that we were lost behind enemy lines without knowledge of what we were fighting.
Status report,
came the voice in the radio.
Are your last 2 Hellfire missiles operational?
I remained wordless for some time. This wasn't what I expected. I wanted answers. Now. The 2 thermobaric Hellfires that were still attached to my Apache were not important now. We were stuck on the tree. Kim heard his request though, and quickly checked what weapons were still online. The rocket pods had been torn apart in the fall. The autocannon was too damaged to shoot, and one of the Hellfire was stuck between the onyx oak and the lateral wing of the helicopter. The other missile, however...
We have 1 Hellfire operational and ready to fire,
said Kim after picking up the radio.
We crashed though, so unless your target is right in front of us, we won't be of much use.
We heard a small explosion on our left, followed by more gunshots. Otherworldly screams sent shivers down my spine, and something huge jumped above the oak tree and rushed towards the firefight. I barely saw its shape, but I was positive that it had more than 2 legs. At that moment, all I wanted to do was stay inside the cockpit of the helicopter, where I felt at least a little bit safer. Without my bird, I was close to being useless. The firefight lasted for about 30 seconds, and was followed by 30 more seconds of utter silence.
I am uploading target coordinates to your helicopter, Voodoo Leader,
said the leader of the Spec Ops.
You may fire when ready, and this time, if you would be so kind to warn us of danger close before you use thermobaric weapons at point blank.
Kim and I exchanged a scared look. We didn't have much of a choice apart from trusting this man. He had survived this long with his squad in the forest. He had to know what he was doing. My gunner entered the coordinates while I tried to look in the direction of the coordinates given, boosting my night vision goggles to the maximum. What I saw took the air out of my lungs. An impossibly tall and skinny shape reminding me of a feline or a giraffe, was standing there. Somehow it was almost invisible, even with my night goggles, as if it wasn't emitting any light, as if it was absorbing the light. Somehow, my eyes couldn't focus on it, and it remained blurry despite my best efforts. Its arms, much longer than the rest of the body, had reverse-jointed elbows that were dug deeply in the ground in a gorilla-like posture. Its face was facing the ground, and something similar to spines or needles came out of the back of its neck, pointing to my left, to where the gunshots previously came. This thing was hunting. It had laid a trap and was waiting for its prey to make a move. For whatever reason, it didn't seem to pay attention to us, even though it must have had good vision in this environment. I kind of hoped that it was because we weren't of interest to it, but I was scared that it simply didn't notice us yet. The second it would see us here in the tree above it, we would be dead.
Do you see something?
Asked Kim, nervously.
Except shadows over shadows, I mean.
I did not answer.
This is Voodoo Leader.
I announced in the radio.
Danger close.
I gave Kim the signal to open fire, which she did with perfect obedience. The hellfire flew away straight at the monster, with almost no time to react, no matter how fast it could have been. I braced for impact. The explosion threw the Apache out of the oak tree. The heat and pressure were unbelievable. Without the reinforced glass of the Apache, I would have either burned up or my eardrums would have been crushed. I lost consciousness before we even touched the ground. Voodoo Leader, the voice echoed in my skull. I had the absolute worst headache that I ever felt, and this was saying a lot. I was trying to regain my focus and get myself back together. Voodoo Leader, said the voice again. That was it. It was all a nightmare. I was in my bed, having a very bad dream, and was about to wake up. None of this existed, except in my mind. I just had to wake up. I pushed on my mind to try and wake myself. Still, the images of the shadows jumping from tree to tree towards me were playing on repeat, like a broken old horror movie extract. The voice in my head became distorted, as if few voices were speaking all at once. The images in my mind started to fast forward. I saw the gorilla giraffe creature through my night vision goggle. Voodoo Leader. This time, it was not blurry at all. The horror of it almost broke me. Its hideous, spike-pierced head slowly turned towards me. Its 4 small round eyes were black bowls, seeming to suck my soul out of my body, even though I knew it had to be a dream. It smiled. Captain Hank Dawn, wake up. I opened my eyes. I was laying on my back on a cold rocky ground. Right above me was a soldier in full combat uniform. It was one of the spec ops that we escorted. He had a knee on the ground, leaning over me. His head was down, as if he was in prayer or in a trance. The first thing I noticed was the small baton in his right hand. Not too different from a riot control weapon. He was holding it very tightly in his palm, and the baton was slightly shining, as if it were fluorescent. I stared at the man for a few seconds, trying to get a sense of where I was. He raised his head before standing up and looking at one of his squad mates. Commander, said the man that had been praying next to me. He is awake. My vision, blurry at first, quickly came back to normal. The pain in my bones that had been gnawing at me since the crash quickly went to the background of my mind. Did they give me some kind of combat drug? I realized that I didn't feel cold anymore. What did you do to me? I asked, way too softly for any of them to hear me. A quick look around showed me that 6 of these unusual soldiers were spread out around what was left of our helicopter, not far away from the onyx oak tree. One woman was sitting right next to the cockpit of the Apache, working on it with some kind of soldering iron. I never saw such a tool, as it was much smaller, yet much brighter than what combat engineers usually carry with them. Above her was the musket sniper that I saw back at the base, standing guard. His rifle seemed old and was extremely ornate with gold and jewelry. It looked more as a work of art that belonged in a museum than an actual working weapon, even though the scope above the musket was just as modern as those of any US sniper. To my left, the man that had been called Commander was more conventional, with an unknown but familiar-looking assault rifle. His helmet was especially reinforced though, and it reminded me of these new prototypes for the Air Force pilots, with many HUD screens and interfaces shown directly to the user. I couldn't see his face at all. The commander was talking with two soldiers. One was the huge man wielding a two-handed hammer, its weapon appearing to weigh as much as my university math teacher, and that says a lot. The second was equipped with a dual-barreled, heavy-looking grenade launcher, and was still as a statue when he was not moving. Was he even breathing? Finally, the man that had taken care of me in my coma was now kneeling over Kim. She seemed injured, but stable. The small baton icon that he held over me was now right over my gunner. It started to shine ever more brightly, until its brightness was enough to allow me to see all around, as if the darkness of the forest was gone. What kind of light was that? Even night vision goggles barely worked before. Voodoo too. The kneeling man started to pray to Kim. There was a musicality to how he repeated her call sign. I tried to stand up, which to my surprise, I managed without difficulty. The light made me feel ever warmer, an incredible feeling which I never thought I would feel, especially here. All my physical pain was gone, and I felt safe. I knew it was a temporary trick of the mind, but still, I enjoyed it. The commander finished his discussion and came in my direction. He offered a handshake, which I accepted after 2 seconds of hesitation. These men had saved me. Voodoo leader, Captain Don, you are alive. Good. I did not know what to say, so I just answered, "Thank you," while nodding. I took a closer look at his uniform. There was only one insignia on it, but I did not recognize it. It was a geometrical logo, 3 lines forming an open triangle. Inside the triangle were 3 circles, each circle touching one of the lines. "I know you must be shaken, Captain Don," said the commander with a soft voice, "but I need you to focus. We must be Oscar Mike in less than 2 minutes. We lost more than half our troops. Shotgun or flamethrower?" I blinked once, then twice. "Excuse me?" I asked, trying to understand the question. "Many of our men died fighting the enemy's first wave. We have more weapons than we can use. Your M4 won't kill what we are about to fight. Are you more comfortable with a shotgun or a flamethrower?" I don't know why I was hoping the mission to be over. They landed. Monsters came. They slaughtered each other. End of story. If only it were so simple. I'm not experienced at all with flamethrowers. I thought so. Shotgun it is. He walked a few steps, took a particularly bulky weapon that was leaning on a tree trunk, and offered it to me. It's a sonic weapon. Normal bullets won't work here. These creatures can shift phase faster than our bullets can reach them. We need either faster bullets or other types of munitions. He looked at me as if he wanted to make sure I understood. I didn't. I never heard of functioning sonic weapons. But if these guys knew it would work, that was fine for me. I nodded while taking the incredibly heavy shotgun. Sonics are efficient enough against what we are hunting. Shorter range than what you are used to. No point shooting at something more than 30 meters away. It becomes effective at 15 meters. Lethal under 5. For you, American, try to keep the target between 6 and 18 yards. I looked at the munitionless weapon for a few seconds, failing to decipher how it was working. Then I realized something the commander said. "What do you mean, you American?
Aren't you US military? I understood from the Malmstrom Air Base that they were not part of any unit that I knew about. But this was new. I am French, my friend, said the commander in a nearly perfect American accent. This is an international initiative. Now, get ready to move, please. He went to the engineer working on the Apache cockpit, asking how the amplifier was going. I was about to get on my way to Kim, who had just woke up, when I realized there was a seventh soldier in the group. She was sitting on a rock in a uniform, just as any other, but she was not wearing any helmet. What stunned me was how young she was. She seemed to be the same age as my daughter, who didn't even finish middle school yet. She was much smaller than the other Spec Ops, so I didn't see her before. But now, I could not take my eyes off this otherworldly vision. She had incredibly long blonde hair, the color of the sun in a painting, and strikingly blue eyes. The worst part was that she did not carry any weapon. She seemed so innocent, so out of place in this hellish forest, and yet someone thought a good idea to put a uniform on her. Excuse me, I started to say to the priest-like man that had been kneeling over Kim. He had finished whatever he did to heal her and was now standing. He did not look at me. You can call me Father Mackenzie, he said, dead serious in his very deep voice. He waited a second before continuing. That was a joke. I'm Sergeant Fellini, but they call me Mackenzie. Seems like you are coming with us. I hope you know how to use this. He pointed at the sonic shotgun that I was still holding without much confidence. What's a child doing here? I asked, going straight to the point. I gave a look in her direction and saw that this kid was staring back. She seemed terrified, but was somehow trying to keep her composure to look brave. Her? She's our guardian angel. That was all Father Mackenzie would tell me. He gave me a far from perfect US military salute, then went on to the hammer-wielding giant. Now that I had a closer look at the hammer, I realized it was far more complex than its crude appearance led me to believe. Under the bronze surface of the head, I could see a lot of integrated circuit and microchips. Somehow, this hammer was a huge piece of hardware. What happened? Asked Kim, slowly getting up and staring around her. Did we win? I smiled at the innocence of her question. No, Kim, I said with a smile in my voice. These foot loggers saved us. We're going with them to finish the job and get an evac, I hope. Pick a weapon and get ready to move. After our last look at the blonde-haired child, which had not moved, I went to the commander who was standing next to the broken cockpit of the Apache. As I got closer, I realized what the engineer was trying to do. She was hijacking electronic components from the Apache to try to boost her radio signal. It seemed to work, as the commander was sending a communication to, I could only guess, Malmstrom base. Hopefully, reinforcements could arrive. Have been engaged. Heavy losses. All air assets lost. The commander was talking in a monotonous voice, as clearly as he could. I could now hear his very distinct French accent. Can confirm ID of the incursion. Plane of shadow. I repeat, plane of shadow incursion confirmed. LZ secured. We're moving in to engage the Herald. Paladin actual. Over and out. I did not understand much, but at least I knew now why they were here. Something called the Herald, whatever that could mean. I was about to ask the commander about the child when he closed the transmission and turned to his troops. Alright, we're moving out. We have less than an hour until the rift. Most of the bastards are dead, but some are still lurking. Let's make sure our brothers and sisters did not die in vain. Stay focused, Paladins. The Spec Ops got ready and in marching order. I even saw the child standing up from a rock and joining the squad. I moved towards the leader. So you're Paladins? Is that it? I asked, eager to know more. That's our call sign. Task Force Paladin. Just as you are voodoo. Don't overthink this too much.
I had so many questions, and so little time. Shouting at him for bringing a kid was not the most absolute priority. I needed to understand more if I were to survive. Where are we going? What is a herald? I saw Kim approaching on my right. She had picked up what looked like some railgun prototype. She was a sharpshooter, on top of being a great Apache gunner. I would feel better knowing that she was watching my back with something akin to a sniper. The commander was about to answer when the engineer interrupted him. She was still listening to incoming transmissions before leaving the Apache behind. She stood up lightning fast, half shouting, "Commander Dumeniil, I heard a general message from Canadian Command. They don't think we'll prevent the rift. They're deploying an entire household. ETA 50 minutes. The commander shook his head in disbelief. He was obviously very displeased. There has never been a rift opening on continental US. He half growled. Today will not be the first. Let's show Canadian Command they worry too much. All paladins were preparing to move when Dumeniil realized he did not answer my question. I was holding more firmly my sonic shotgun, and Kim was already comfortable with a railgun. Okay, let's do a 1-minute crash course, he said after a sigh. Better to get us up to speed if we were going to be efficient addition to the group. There are other dimensions, and we call them planes of existence. We don't understand why, but sometimes creatures from those planes arrive in our world. We call this an incursion. Incursions are no accident. They are deliberate attacks. They secure their landing zone, pollute the area with their raw energies, mutating or replacing the wildlife and the vegetation. I tried to follow what Commander Dumeniil was explaining, but that was just unbelievable. If it was in any other circumstance, I would not have listened. Even if he came to me right before our squadron took off, I would have considered him deranged. After having my helicopter snatched out of the sky by one of those creatures, I was more than eager to listen carefully. There is always a bigger one leading the pack, continued Dumeniil. We call it a herald. If left alive long enough, he generates enough planar radiation to open a rift. A rift is a full-blown hole in reality between our world and their plane. There is virtually no way of closing a rift. Their armies will keep pouring forth. Our only option at this point is sustained nuclear bombardment. In the ocean or the desert, it is not so bad. Here in Montana, it would be harder to hide. So now, if you'd be so kind to come with us and help kill this herald. Kim and I exchanged a look. Never had we been trained for this. Other dimensions? Malicious forces intent on creating bridgeheads on Earth. An international task force to stop all of this? This was way beyond my pay grade. I had a whole lot more questions, but the whole group started moving, and so we followed. I kept my eyes open while we moved forward. The forest had mutated in horrible ways. Thorns had appeared around nearly every surface, and worms seemed to move inside the barks of a few trees that still looked earthly. Father Mackenzie kept his baton high, producing the same warm light that had healed me. Clouds of noisy red-eyed insects the size of my fist were kept at the edge of the light. These horrifying creatures seemed attracted by this light just as they were unable to approach without getting burnt. Once shadow creatures know you're here, the female engineer started to explain. The only way to protect yourself is with light. She seemed anxious, almost as nervous as me, and was very willing to talk. Maybe not her first mission, but not far from that. She kept almost whispering, but Kim and I remained by her side to listen. Shadows absorb natural light. Better to use planar light. Both Mackenzie and Serena are light-touched. That makes them invaluable here. Using light against shadow seemed logic enough to me, but I didn't understand the rest of what she said. Light-touched? You talk about Serena, interrupted Kim. Are you talking about that girl? She indicated to the teenage kid that was in the center of her formation. It took me a while to realize it, but she too was emitting a soft brightness. I had to force myself to stop looking at her and the warmth that pulsated from her, Yeah, answered the engineer. She's our guardian angel. She used the same exact expression as Mackenzie to describe her. Odd. Her parents were killed during a light incursion in Vermont 2 years ago. Mackenzie saved her. It was his first mission. He was light-touched the same moment as her, but they both survived. I nodded silently. This was still very new to me, and I was trying to get every little piece of information that would allow me to understand this group and what they were fighting. This was obviously not the first time any of them were deployed, and it eased the terror to know that they knew what they were doing. I believed the rest of the mission could go just as any other mission. We would eliminate the target and go home. Now that I think of it, how naive that thought was. "I'm Sarah, by the way," said the engineer quickly, as she realized she forgot the most basic of manners. "Sarah Gallagher, New Yorker born and raised. That's my second posting. Went on a fire incursion in California last month, but I did not see any action up close." Kim and I slowly acknowledged by nodding our heads while fighting not to fall down. There was a sort of sticky goo on the ground that would keep your feet on the ground, then all of a sudden become very slippery. It was a struggle just to keep walking. "Captain Hank Don," I introduced myself. "You are not military, are you, Sarah?" She looked away as if ashamed. "Well, I try my best to blend in." She kept silent for about 5 seconds. "No, I'm not," she admitted. "They recruited me because I'm good with fluid dynamics, cellular radiations, and quantum theories. All are very useful for interacting with technologies exposed to the planes. This guy came to watch my thesis, said I will have intuitive understanding of planar-related technologies, paid all of my student debt, and then some more, offered me great pay, said I'd help save the world. And here I am." She was talking a lot, and fast. Typical of a person without enough military training being exposed to a combat situation. Her commander didn't seem to mind. He was too focused on leading the way and getting us out of this swampy ground as fast as possible. I saw him looking at his watch every 30 seconds or so. Air moved above us as something big dived toward us. I didn't notice it until the musket-wielding soldier suddenly fell to one knee, aimed upward and shot. All within a 2-second time frame. I immediately looked up and saw a creature akin to a horse-sized bat being swatted out of the sky. The musket didn't shoot lead, but instead a white-blue discharge of energy that caught the left wing of the creature on impact. Similarly to an airplane who had lost a wing, the bat lost control of its trajectory and crashed with tremendous speed about 15 meters from us. I barely had enough time to aim up my shotgun when 2 grenades flew from my left, impacting the injured monster half a second later. Static electricity made my hairs raise, while God knows how many volts were pumped into the bat by the electric grenades. The shape of the shadowy bat became clearer for a second, and I managed to see its impossibly long fangs, each the length of my arm. The monster evaporated as smoke after an ultrasound death shriek so high it was physically painful to hear. "Great shot, Karl, and good kill, Mike," congratulated Dumanil to his men. "But keep your eyes open. This was a small one." As an answer to the commander's provocation, a pack of dog-sized creatures emerged from the forest on all directions. They seemed to appear out of the shadows themselves, popping into reality like nightmares made truth. They jumped around like frogs, quickly rushing at us. The light of Serena and Mackenzie started to burn them away as soon as they got in range, making them vanish as water dissolves ink. But they were coming at us freakishly fast. I barely had enough time to raise my shotgun and shot at the first 6-legged toad that jumped on me. The thing was above me, and I shot almost vertically, The sound was deafening, but the creature evaporated in front of me. All around me, the paladins quickly took a defensive formation. Electricity and energy discharges flew around me.
These are not wildlife,
said Dumanil in the general comm channel, while firing salvo after salvo of flash-charged bullets. Each exploded inside the shadow toads, even though they phased out. The flashes of light dissipated the creatures as surely as any other weapons.
These are summons. There is a shadow shaper somewhere.
There was no end to these things. I kept firing, vanishing one frog after the other. In my peripheral vision, I saw something move in the tree. It was humanoid, but clearly a beast. It pounced at me with a roar from a tree 10 meters away. I understood with horror that I wouldn't have time to aim fast enough when this werewolf thing was obliterated. It was cut in two by the impact in the lower torso, and the two pieces were sent flying away in the trees. I flipped around to see where the shot was coming from. Kim was still standing, not believing the power of the rifle. The magnets on the side of the long barrel were all up, and were now slowly getting back into position. I nodded my thanks and went back to the fight. To my surprise, Sergeant Fellini, or should I say Father Mackenzie, was using his light-emitted baton as a melee weapon. Each time it struck one of the shadow toad, it emitted a pulse of light that obliterated every creature in a 5-meter radius. He also had a pistol in its end, entirely covered in esoteric symbols. Except from the unknown symbols that I could guess on the weapon by standing right next to Mackenzie, there was nothing special about this gun. However, each shot blasted away a toad with frightening efficiency. We were holding, but little by little, our defensive circle became tighter. In the center, Serena was making her light shine as bright as possible, weakening the frenzied toads, but that wasn't enough. We were all around her to protect her. The energy discharges from the musket sniper became less and less bright and powerful, until it took 2 shots to kill a toad. The grenades became less frequent, as Mike was trying to make each of them count. My sonic shotgun became hotter at every shot, and soon became painful to hold it, even with my gloves. I didn't see how we could win this fight. All of a sudden, all toads disappeared. Only one werewolf was coming at us from the tree, but a well-aimed shot from Kim killed him just as surely as it did for the other ones. Mackenzie kissed his baton and its pistol in turn, then went to hug Serena, who was on the verge of tears. Karl, Mike, and the other paladins remained in fighting position, ready for other wild werewolves, or worse.
Well done, Numansa,
said Dumanil, nearly out of breath.
We are clear here.
I did not understand who the commander was talking to. Could some paladin survive in this forest outside of Serena's light? It was not my problem right now. I put the sonic shotgun on the ground, and its heat burned the goo away. The purplish texture burned away like steam, and I could swear I heard the faintest scream. Kim, I said to my gunner. Next time someone signs us up for a night escort mission, I'm out. Commander Dominio looked at his watch and was visibly displeased by what he saw. He reloaded his assault rifle, then made a hit movement to indicate the rest of his force to move forward. Come on, paladins. This was just a wildlife. You don't want to leave all the funds to Canadian Command, right? We took a second to catch our breath, then went back on the march, deeper into the forest. According to the commander's map, we weren't far away from the Herald now. We killed the main shadow force at the landing zone, said Sarah happily. The planar wildlife won't mess with us anymore, and we're close to our target. This is a small incursion, so it'll be a small Herald, right? I felt victory coming. The universe had thrown its worst at Kim and I, and we had survived. How naive I was. If I knew at this moment what we were about to find out there, I would have probably ran away.
in the other direction.
We continued in relative silence after the ambush. I was still shaken to my core by the flood of shadows that nearly engulfed us in the forest. Grasping my weapon tighter, I tried to focus on my breath, as well as not falling on the ground. The sticky goo on the floor became slippery seemingly at random, and more than once, one of our own would fall flat. We were all exhausted. The pale moon barely breached the canopy of the trees, and every single color felt a lot paler than I remembered them to be. I looked around at the soldiers around us, trying to find comfort in their coordinated, silent progression through this anguishing landscape. Their squad had rescued Kim and I from our crashed helicopter, and were now our best bet at getting out of this forest alive. All that I knew was that they were part of an international organization meant to fight off these creatures wherever they may appear. These things were not from our dimension. The squad leader, Commander Dominiel, said there were other planes parallel to our own reality. What attacked us came from the plane of shadow. "We are now 25 minutes BR," said Dominiel after checking his watch for what felt like the millionth time. "That's too tight for my liking." He turned around to look at his unit, what was left of his task force paladin. I guess he realized that, however well-equipped and well-trained his men were, they weren't enough to put up a real fight should the enemy offer any substantial resistance. Aside from Sarah, his technological expert, he could also count on Karl, the musket-wielding marksman, and Mike. The massive man with the hammer was called Zeng, from what I could decipher. And there was, of course, Father Mackenzie and his protege, the teenage girl Serena. Both Serena and Mackenzie had been light-touched in a previous attack by the Plane of Light. This made them incredible assets when fighting shadow creatures, as their capacities, which I could call nothing less than supernatural, could dissipate these monsters as water dissolves ink. The last member of Paladin, even though I only heard Dominiel call her on the radio, was Mimansa. She saved us from the ambush by killing the summoner, from what I understood. Then, of course, there was Kim and I. She picked up a railgun from one of the dead Paladin. I got a sonic shotgun, two weapons we didn't even know existed a few hours before. Commander Dominiel, visually inspecting his troops, noticed how out of place we looked. We were two helicopter pilots, not wearing their red and black uniforms, but still our flight suits. "For you flyboys, BR means before Rift." The commander reminded us of our objective, but that was not necessary. We kept our nerves, so far. And I did not forget the part where he mentioned the Rift was an open door for legions of interdimensionals to invade our world. "The Herald will soon have enough planar radiation accumulated to open the Rift," continued Sarah, still by my side. "He is our only objective. Once he is dead, we'll have all the time in the world to clean up the forest." I nodded to show that I understood what was at stake. If I were honest, I would have shrugged and told him I didn't understand much. I was just given a gun and asked to follow. But these guys knew what they were doing, so I did place my faith in them and let them lead the way. Anyway, from what we heard on the radio, an entire household was coming down from Canada as backup. I didn't know how many men that meant, but this sure sounded as the whole cavalry. Knowing there was a backup plan if we were devoured in this forest made it feel just a little bit easier. Weapons at the ready, I moved in cohesion with the group as we were trying to catch up lost time. I tried to decipher each and every one of the moving shadows around us to understand if it was or not a threat. Turned out almost everything in this forest was a threat, but Mackenzie and Serena kept most away. They were shining beacons of light, attracting lots of small creatures on the edge, but preventing any from coming too close. "At least you guys are trained for this." Kim broke the silence. She was not in a good mood at all, and I could understand her. 20 minutes of walking into the unknown was gnawing at her nerves. You guys are the best for this job. You'll succeed. What is our role? Kim never liked being on the ground, especially in a combat zone. We might be the best, answered Father Mackenzie, who somehow managed to hear her despite the distance. But we are not enough. Don't think we are winning this war, Voodoo. Something moved inside the broken husk of a tree. It was inside the light perimeter of Serena. Whatever it was not one of the smallest monsters.
Watch out!
Was all I managed to say, before a slimy, spiky tentacle thing burst out and in the blink of an eye attached itself to the left arm of the hammer-wielding soldier. He gasped in pain, but otherwise did not move. Blood immediately started to drip from the arm. There was no time to think. I aimed at the tree trunk from which the tentacle came and opened fire. It was about 25 meters away from me, nearly out of range, but I had to try. My shotgun was still hot from the previous encounter, and it loaded its energies half a second before unleashing a sonic shockwave on the tree. The sound was deafening. It almost covered the shriek of pain of the creature that received the blast. The sticky goo that fell on the ground flew away, and the tree that hit the monster was shattered. Inside, a snake-like shape moved away quickly, trying to pull at the hammer and take him away from the light.
"Oh no you don't,"
said the hammer wielder simply. He anchored his legs in the ground, preventing the snake worm from gaining any ground, and took his massive hammer in his one arm. He pushed something on the handle, and the head of the hammer came to life. It emitted an annoying electric buzz, and light was distorted around it, just as an asphalt road becomes blurry under the heat. With great effort, the hammer wielder plunged this weapon into the tentacle, and the entire shadow worm exploded in a thunderous boom. Static electricity ran wild, and a few lightning bolts spread around us, almost hitting Kim, who ducked the cover.
"I hate shadow,"
growled the wounded soldier.
"They are the worst."
"You've never been deployed against Shadow Zhang," replied the grenade launcher soldier, quickly approaching his friend. "Stop playing the veteran."
"Never have you, Bill,"
snorted the hammerer, presenting his wounded arm to the child, Serena. She came to him with quick footsteps. I noticed that the goo on the ground seemed to recede where she walked, as if it was alive and trying to stay away from her. The left arm of the hammerer was getting worse, fast. Blood was turning black and the skin seemed to necrose in a matter of seconds. The poison, whatever it was spreading fast. Serena put both her hands a few centimeters away from the wound, and a blinding flash made me look away. Once the persistence of exposure dissipated and I could look again, I saw that not only the poison stopped spreading, it was disappearing. "What the hell is going on, Hank?" asked Kim. I didn't know what to answer. This was beyond me. We were never trained for this. They just gave us weapons because we were there, combat ready, and had a chance to help. This was too much for both of us. The rest of the walk was without ambush. That didn't diminish the stress. I tried to talk with Serena, but she didn't answer any of my questions. I could see that she was terrified, but was steeling herself. "She just wants vengeance," said Commander Duminil when he saw my efforts were fruitless. "Just like most of us." "She's just a kid, sir," I answered as calmly as I could. "She has nothing to do here."
"She has everything to do here,"
barked Duminil in a harsh tone.
"Thousands of people are plain touched around the world every month. Fatality rate from the mutations is close to 100%. Not only is she still alive, she can use her newfound abilities to fight the planes. She's a more important asset than any of us here." "She is a child," I replied, nearly losing my temper.
Maybe Serena reminded me too much of my daughter. But it made me furious that she could be sent to a battlefield just as any soldier. For some reason, I wanted to protect her and her beautiful light. Dominique seemed shocked at my insolence. Kim physically put herself between the commander and I, and she was about to say something when a female voice came on the radio. It was distorted, barely audible, as if she had to put her radio down and was screaming inside an echo chamber filled with water.
Eyes on the Herald. I hope you guys don't have arachnophobia.
The musket-wielding sniper raised his shoulders and let go of a long sigh. Why does it always have to be insects? Water, life, shadow. It is always an insect, no matter the plane. Father Mackenzie snorted. He looked at the musketeer, shaking his head left to right in a paternalistic way. Wait until you face death, or blood, he said in a low tone, and you'll miss insects. I looked at Dominique interrogatively, still wondering where the voice in the radio was coming from. He understood my silent question as he answered his squad mate. Copy that, Mimansa. We are 80 seconds behind you. Wait for us. Any other contact? They did have some sort of scout after all. That same person that killed the summoner. How she stayed alive outside of the protective field of the light touched was beyond me.
There were 12 hunter-class creatures. Too much for us to handle,
described the scout. I had to focus to hear what she said. She could just well have screamed inside a bowl of water.
They just took off, heading north. Probably going after the Canadians. Harold seems alone.
If there is one thing I learned from my service overseas, it is that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. Dominique seemed competent enough, but he was obviously not as experienced as I would like him to be. Judging by his voice, he was 30 at best. A trap? I hazarded myself. An opportunity, Dominique replied instantly. Or a trap, yeah. Could be both. A few moments later, we were standing on the edge of a huge crater. I was never an ace in geography, but I was positive this 600-meter wide crater was not there before. The Spec Ops squad deployed on the edge line. The scout Memansa was nowhere in sight. Inside the desolate land of the crater, spiky tentacles started to erupt from the ground, flaying the air aimlessly. Flocks of four-winged, raven-sized creatures flew in a circle around the shapeless shadow at the center. There was something there, but I couldn't see it. It was more an absence of light than a real presence, as if my eyes turned blind whenever I tried to look at it. The plane of shadow was breaking through. Then, I noticed it. Not far from us, 100 meters inside the crater, was a crashed helicopter. Voodoo 4. It was the last helicopter from Voodoo Squadron that, as far as I know, was still operational. It had been flown away from the battle at the landing zone before being shut down. Kim was also staring at it when, "They are still alive," she said, narrowing her eyes to get a better view. "I see Tom and Lisa. They are alive, trapped in the cockpit." After she said that, I could see it too. They both saw us coming from the edge of the crater and were frantically waving at us. Around the crashed Apache were a few rabbit-sized shadow creatures, but the way seemed clear. "We have to save them," said Kim, who was looking through the scope of a railgun. I didn't wait for her permission. I somehow felt compelled to save Voodoo 4. Without waiting for the paladins, I started to go down the slope of the crater, shouting Tom's name. I barely made a few steps towards Tom and Lisa when someone firmly grabbed my arm. It was Mike. "No," said the large man simply. He was much stronger than me, and I was already starting to get my thoughts back. Where was I going? It is an illusion, continued Mackenzie. A veil on the mind. It wants you to go there. Sarah and Karl were holding Kim, who was desperate to run to her friends. They were struggling, as my former gunner seemed possessed and was screaming. "Let me go," she shouted in their faces. "I have to save them." "Psychic mind tricks," said Dumanil. "I'm sorry to confront you about this. You are not trained. We are elite, able to resist any and all forms of..." He was interrupted by Serena's loud gasp of horror. Foam was coming out of Zhang's mouth, out of his helmet. He let his hammer fall on the ground, took out his helmet, and allowed his head to rest on his right shoulder at an unnaturally sharp angle. His empty eyes were staring at something in the crater, and he sprinted towards it. He was fast, much faster than I thought someone as bulky as himself could be. Father Mackenzie reacted fast. He took out his baton and rushed to intercept Zhang, trying to hit him in the legs. Zhang was only moving with his legs, his two arms left to hang on the side. When Mackenzie was close enough though, his left arm moved, as if animated by its own free will. It lashed out at the priest with incredible speed, throwing Mackenzie a few meters backward. Mike threw me upwards on the edge of the crater and rushed after his friend. He shot a flash grenade towards Zhang, aiming for the head. Instinctively, the hammerer's left arm intercepted the grenade. Sarah was helping me back on my feet when I saw Zhang's hand grow in size, its inflated flesh full of black veins, and swallowed the grenade whole. Zhang stopped in his tracks and turned around to face Mike, who was now in full sprint. Throwing away his grenade launcher, Mike took out a combat knife and pushed something. The blade started humming loudly, a rapid vibrating sound that was painful to the ear. Zhang took a step back, then another. Serena fell on her knees, crying something I didn't understand, when Mike plunged knife first into Zhang, aiming for the infected arm. With preternatural skill, the hammerer blocked the attack with his right arm, which was neatly cut in half by the impossible sharp knife. Karl was aiming down the scope of his musket when he muttered a very audible, "Oh shit." A flock of mutated raven was attacking Mike with incredible speed. I was ready to open fire when I realized they were out of range of my shotgun. Dumanil and Sarah shot volley after volley of automatic fire onto the flying fiends, while Karl was still waiting for a kill shot. Serena was by Kim's side, trying to calm her down. Mike and Zhang were engaged in a terrible, relentless brawl. "We have to kill the Herald," grunted Mackenzie, who was trying to stand up. "He is the cause of all of this." Dumanil agreed, about to give an order, when in an instant, the shadow in the center of the crater revealed itself. The time for hiding was finally over, it seemed. I felt my heart stop when I saw the abomination that was the Herald. I could barely perceive it, as if my soul itself did not want me to see it. My eyes could not focus on it, but I saw enough. It was similar to a 20 meters high daddy-long leg, only with many, many more legs. Each leg seemed to be made of spider hairs knitted together, with eyes crawling on the surface. The legs appeared boneless, and the strong cold wind of the crater made each of them oscillate for dozens of meters, as if they were just smoky illusions, useless to maintain the body above ground. It did not have a body at the core of its many legs, but rather a gigantic black orb. It took me many more seconds to realize it was an eye, and that it was looking at us. Kim gasped in horror while Mackenzie started a prayer. Tears came to my eyes, and I felt like I was losing my balance. Something whispered at the back of my mind. It whispered of untold promises, of gifts beyond reason, It whispered of embracing the cold. I felt my consciousness getting away from my body. I bit my tongue to prove that I was not dreaming and was horrified to realize I didn't feel it anymore. I tried to bite it for a bit longer before understanding that I was not looking at the Herald anymore. I had lost my vision. Only darkness surrounded me, and I felt my brain going cold. Echoes of voices I knew rang left and right. Every fiber of my being was freezing. Yet, I felt I was not alone. Something was looking at me, as a cat waits for a mouse to try to run away. Suddenly, warmth reappeared. First in my belly, then spreading to my arms and legs. I eagerly waited for the warmth to reach my head. I first opened my mouth, then blinked my eyes. I could see again. I was on both my knees, my body aimed towards the Herald. However, I could not see the creature. Serena was standing in front of me, holding my head in both her hands. Lights were dancing in her eyes. "Thank you," I struggled to articulate. She did not reply, instead giving a gentle kiss on my forehead. More warmth, and I felt as if my whole body obeyed me again. Serena did not waste time, immediately going to heal another member of the squad. I crawled to Commander Duminil. He was on the ground, coughing violently. Serena had already healed him, but it didn't seem to be enough. He took something from inside his suit and presented it to me. It was some sort of PDA, or a small tablet, particularly thick. I noticed that apart from me, only Father Mackenzie and Serena were still standing. While the girl went from soldier to soldier to get them out of their psychosis, Father Mackenzie kept his shining baton high, trying to envelop our squad in its light. The Herald kept his entire attention on Mackenzie, who was obviously in agonizing pain. He fell to one knee, holding his shining icon as high as he could while shouting a prayer that I didn't understand. "Shoot! There!" the commander struggled to say between coughs. He tried to say more, but his coughs were too strong. He took off his helmet and immediately vomited a brownish blood on the ground. His ears and nose were bleeding as well, and I thought I saw something move in what he threw up. I grabbed this device and tried to understand how it worked. It was some sort of radiation analyzer, offering a view similar to thermics. I aimed it at the monstrous Herald and saw its true colors. The black eye at the center was emitting planar radiation in every direction, according to the commander's device. The center of the radiation, though, was about 5 meters below the eye, seemingly floating in the air below the creature. I tried to stand up on both my feet, but I felt weak. The gravity felt much higher, or maybe it was my muscles that became atrophied in a minute. I crawled to Kim and took a railgun. Laying down in firing position, I looked into the scope of the weapon, trying to aim where Duminil's instrument was indicating me to fire. Then, I pulled the trigger. I was expecting a huge recoil, but it was no different than a regular sniper. Nothing happened. The slug went right through the cloudy shadow. Did I miss? A screeching mechanic sound came from the north. Rotors and motor engines. A whole armada of helicopters were coming in hot in the distance. There was an entire wing of aircrafts. Black Hawk and Little Bird transports, Cobra and Apache escorts, the whole deal. Escort helicopters were spreading out in attack positions. Above them, fixed-wing aircrafts were engaged in deadly duels with impossibly fast flying creatures that looked like shadowy grasshoppers. At least 200 rotorcrafts and 30 fast movers were closing in on the Herald, full speed. That was our backup. I looked around for a radio, hoping to hear something from these reinforcements. But unfortunately, none was around. The Herald stopped staring at Mackenzie to focus its attention on the oncoming helicopters. I didn't understand what it did, but a dozen of the helicopters just fell to the ground, as if their pilots simply decided to voluntarily plunge to the ground. I opened my mouth in shock and realized how moist the air was. It felt like inside a putrid tropical jungle. At least there was no smell. The railgun clicked. I did not understand what it meant. Could I fire again? I looked once more on the PDA. The center of the creature had moved. A hail of rockets came from the incoming helicopters, obliterating the center of the crater. I saw on the commander's device the true invisible Herald jumping high in the air, while the illusion of its body remained on the ground. None of the rockets touched the heart. Worse, it pretended to be hurt, many of its legs falling on the ground in a fake cascade of dark blood. Something to trick the pilots. Damn you, you little... I tried to focus on my breath, putting the PDA up so I could follow the Herald. Damn your illusions. Damn your tricks. It was fast. How could I hope to hit it? I was no marksman. I hate spiders. The voice came from before me. It was one of the Spec Ops. The musket-wielding one. Karl, was it? This Herald isn't really a spider, but I will squash it still. Keep the device up, yes? I put down the railgun and held the heavy tablet higher so that the musketeer could look at it and aim at the same time. It took a huge effort for me to stand on my feet. More and more helicopters were falling as rocks, with some of them simply vanishing in the air as if they were nothing more than smoke. The lights of rockets fired at the monster blipped and disappeared, simply stopped existing. Don't miss. Talking was still very difficult for me. Apparently, the marksman had healed faster than I did. I won't. The energy discharge speared through the night sky. I kept my eyes on the PDA and could not hold a scream of joy when I saw the Herald's core distort on impact. The pressure on my heart was gone in an instant. Direct hit! You got him! There was an explosion of pure coldness. I fell on my back, knocked away by the shockwave. The fall was painful, but it meant I was still alive and in full control of my body. A few seconds later, the gravity felt lighter. I managed to stand up without much difficulty. All the anguish, all the horror, all the pain went away. Commander Duminil stopped coughing. Kim came back to her senses. All of the paladins stood, except Mackenzie, who was lying unconscious. Serena was over him, trying to help, but he seemed to be in a coma. For the first time since the beginning of the mission, I took a long breath that wasn't filled with terror. That was close, said the commander while standing up, wiping blood from the side of his mouth. We'll have to thank Canadian Command for their diversion. All around us, the transport helicopters were touching down, dropping squads of black and red soldiers. Flamethrowers were starting to burn down the tentacles and to purge the forest. I saw a man without weapons conjuring fire in his hands before throwing it on a thrashing tentacle. I saw another one coordinating a fleet of sonic cannon armed drones to fire at the base of the corrupted trees. I recognized the triangular symbol of their organization on the helicopters, no matter if they were transports or attack crafts. I didn't see the jet fighters above, who were still fighting against the remnants of the grasshoppers. But I could bet that they too belonged to this group. They have their own air fleet, I said in disbelief to Kim. How the hell did they get such an army? And why did they call us? The answer came from Sarah Gallagher. The engineer was still groggy, but she could stand. A huge smile was printed on her face now that she had taken her helmet off. Sorry for that, Captain Don. Paladin was in training near Malmstrom when our own birds and most of our forces were deployed on another operation in Illinois. Once a call came of a shadow incursion here in Montana, there was no time to get our own pilots back in time. We have to go real quick wherever there is an incursion. But hey, she said, putting her thumb up. I guess they'll offer you a job in the Inquisition after this. Kim repressed a laugh. You call yourself the Inquisition? Slow down, fly girl. Don't think it was my decision, answered Sarah, visibly vexed. It is just an old organization. Really old. Council of Constantinople old. Around us, the Canadian household was securing the crater. Light armored vehicles were deployed, and even a few tanks were dropped from larger helicopters. More than 1,000 of infantry troops were now around the crater, while more and more reinforcements flocked in. Tasted like victory. Yeah, it always tastes like victory. Just before life sucker punches you. Contact US Command, Sarah, asked Commander Dumenil after talking with a similar-looking officer that just arrived from a Black Hawk with his whole squad. Tell them there was nothing to worry about. Sarah nodded and put back her helmet. All joy dissipated from her body language in a few seconds, though. I can't reach them. The local comms are now working, but not long range. That's impossible. Dumenil almost laughed. The Herald is dead. Mackenzie coughed violently while he came back to himself. Serena backed away. He looked around like a frightened animal, then took a second to understand where he was, before shouting to Dumenil. It was a decoy! A terrible sense of dread fell on me. My muscles froze, and my eyes frantically looked around, looking for a threat. The real Herald. It's underground. Mackenzie was struggling to get back on his feet, but already the squad was getting its weapons ready. Commander Dumenil took his radio and visibly panicked. I looked at the PDA, still in my hand. There was a threshold of ambient planar radiation. It had kept rising slowly. We did not kill the Herald, only its atrocious bodyguard. And now, there was enough radiation in the air for... Oh God.
Attention all Inquisitorial forces,
shouted Dumenil on the general radio channel.
Herald not destroyed. It was a decoy. Repeat, the Herald is underground. We need bunker buster shots at the center of...
I felt like I lost my senses. For a second, all went to black. It was like standing in an immensely powerful elevator or being dropped in a huge roller coaster. I fell flat on my belly, dropping the PDA that was now blinking in red. Alarm texts were beeping on the screen, but I didn't need to read them. Wind started to blow inward towards the center of the crater. An inhuman screech came from there, followed by a repeating sound so otherworldly I couldn't even begin to imagine what sort of thing could produce it. I did, however, recognize what type of sound it was, and that shook my being to its core. It It was laughter. I looked up. The skies were pitch black. Fighter jets still chasing the last surviving shadow creatures in high altitude. But they were little more than fireflies above a black hole. There above the crater, reality broke. Something tore through the veil between dimensions. A hole was made. The laughter continued while the winds became stronger. I felt all the heat around me being absorbed towards it. The air became thick and moist here, and the helicopters flew away as fast as they could. Tank turrets turned toward the ever-expanding tear.
No.
Duminil repeated maniacally.
No. We have to close it before it expands. It will keep expanding. We have to close it. It's too late for you to worry about that,
screamed Father Mackenzie, overriding Duminil on the radio command channel.
Code Black, all forces, defensive position. Serena, with me. Here they come.
A cacophony of screeches and screams came from inside the tear in reality. A horde was coming, and it was coming hard. The Inquisition forces were trained for this eventually, but all prayed every day that they would not live to see such a day. I gave a look at Kim, who already had a railgun in hand, while I picked up my shotgun. Rift! Sarah half shouted, half cried in the radio. Rift! 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 I've never been paying any attention to conspiracy theories. I know some people have made it their hobbies of finding out what the government might be hiding from them. But not me. No time for this kind of thing. Got my 2 kids back at home full time. Their mom divorced me 5 years ago. Took a lot of things with her. Killed herself in a car crash last February, just after I lost my job. Been working as an Uber driver to pay the bills while looking for a new permanent job. Yesterday, I was driving to clients when I heard and saw things that made me question a lot of things. Wanted to share this with you. As of today, I still have no rational explanation as to what happened. I should say, I'm a New Yorker. I now live upstate, about an hour from Albany. I usually do short rides. But yesterday, just after I finished my breakfast, I received a request for a quite unusual ride. Some guy wanted to be dropped at the gates of Griffiths Air Force Base. It was a few hours away, longer than the rides I usually accept. But the price was surprisingly high. That was the first indication that something was off. At that moment, I only thought that the guy was somehow related to the military, and that the army had some kind of partnership with Uber, so that the drivers have more incentives to quickly accept rides. I did accept the ride, even though I now wish I had listened to the voice in the back of my head, telling me just to wait for another request. So, I went to pick up the customer. Meeting point was next to student buildings, right by a technological university, as the profile indicated on my app. This was a kid, too young to even be graduated yet. He was dressed sharp, nice suit, with a large laptop too big to fit in a leather suitcase that looked brand new. "Michael?" I called him after lowering my window. It was a warm morning of July, and I felt the heat rush inside my car. "Yeah, that's me, thanks," he answered surprisingly fast. He was as excited as my own boy when he was in elementary school, and I agreed to take him to Revenge of the Sith. Behind his thin glasses, I could see that he was stressed. looking around them before getting in the car. Not unusual for geeks. They are easily stressed. He got in the front passenger seat, but I still wanted to confirm the destination. It was unusual. Better sure I don't drop an IT guy in military custody just because he mistyped his home address.
So you're going to Griffiths Air Force Base, right?
Michael nodded excitedly. He was way too eager to go there. I acknowledged and started to drive. He was on his phone for about 10 minutes before his eyes went back to the road. He looked at the countryside a bit more before he started to talk. "I've been offered a job," he said with a smile in his voice. "Well, if I get through the tests. They said my profile was exceptional." I gave him a side look for a second. I didn't see how this kid was any different. Probably some sort of nerd, I thought to myself. Math genius or rocket engineer. What did I know? Good for him. I don't want to sound bitter. I'm happy when I see people succeeding in life around me, even if I struggle. "That's good, Michael," I replied, sounding way too paternalistic to my own liking. "Stay focused and don't miss this shot." I did not really want to make conversation. Michael said something that I did not hear because my mind was focused on my phone. My application just recommended that I take another client to share the ride. It was barely a 3-minute detour, and she was also going to Griffiths. "Well, looks like you are not the only one going to the AFB today," I said while opening her profile. "Yes, I know. It is wrong to use your phone while on the highway, but I wanted to check something. Just a weird feeling in my guts." She looked very young, had few reviews. All of them were 5 stars. An unusually good client. For some reason, I felt something was off, again, but I still accepted. The price was just as high as for Michael, and I was already going there. I picked her up in a small town right by a highway exit. She was standing in front of a closed bar in a short flower dress. She made a huge smile when I parked, her eyes narrowing under the rise of her cheeks. Her hair was a bright red, way too colorful to be natural, which is something I usually don't enjoy. On her, however, it produced a charm that I could not explain by words.
"Judith?"
I half opened the window. It was even hotter here than in Albany. She nodded silently, still smiling, and went to the back seat right behind me. "Hi," she simply said. "Nice to meet you guys." I noticed that she had complex tattoos around her neck, below her wrists and above her knees. Some sort of Celtic iconography from my guess, but I don't know much of this kind of thing. Michael awkwardly greeted her, and we fell in an even more awkward silence. It lasted for about 20 minutes as we drove to Griffiths Air Force Base. There was something flowery in the air. At first, I did not pay attention, but as we were driving by a semi-industrial town, that smell started to feel out of place. I was just about to say something about it when Michael talked to the girl. "Not feeling too cold, miss? With the air conditioner and the difference with outside. I mean, I'm freezing personally." Not saying anything, I pushed the temperature a bit higher. The girl just smiled again for a time. Now that we were close, I noticed that her eyes were of an unusual color. They were greenish, going to the yellow. Probably another drug addict listening to weird music all day, wearing eye contacts. Hippies. "I'm fine," said the girl. "I can handle cold and heat." She made an eye movement up and down a few times, as if she was analyzing Michael. It was way too exaggerated for it to meant it discreet. She wanted to be seen. Poor boy blushed almost instantly. "Going to a job interview?" she asked, still smiling. "Actually, yes," answered Michael, excited again. "Been offered a job as an analyst for the Air Force." I nodded, happy for the kid, while she smiled wider, this time showing her teeth. Some of them were pointy, not unlike those of a vampire or a shark. Damn those techno hippies, I thought to myself. That was revolting. I focused my attention away from her. Back to Michael. That's great for you, Mike. I started, hoping he wouldn't mind the short name. I guess that's unusual for someone your age, right? Eagerness was visible on his face. Outside, the heat made the highway look blurry. This day was impossibly hot. I had to get on the side of the road as a convoy of 5 military transport trucks rushed at full speed through the highway. They were also going to Griffiths, but were obviously in a hurry. I actually developed an algorithm, been working on coincidence patterns. Does that speak to you? Judith smiled and nodded. But I could only shrug. This was nerdy talk to me. Not really, Mike, I said politely. Could you explain easily? I'm not the sharpest tool. Blessed is the closed mind. I'm pretty sure I heard Judith whisper. When I looked into the rear view, Judith was looking at the sights, half smiling, as if she was thinking about something for a moment. She somehow felt my stare and said, just a saying a friend used to tell me long ago. Who did she think she was? I always try not to sound like the old bitter guy. But her, who was 22 at the maximum, was behaving as if she had already seen everything. I hate these spoiled kids. Well, to make it simple, interrupted Michael. Let's just say that there is a causality link between seemingly random events and the number of deaths. Not something anecdotic. And not just here in the States, but worldwide. I tried to repeat the sentence in my head, hoping it would make more sense. It didn't. Sorry, kid, you lost me. Michael seemed saddened, trying to give me a smile, then started over. If certain events happen, apparently very secondary, the death rate will rise in the neighboring region. Not every time, but if it does, it will quite substantially. I took a few seconds to think, but I was starting to see the bigger picture. What kind of events? I asked. Mostly about the weather, actually, said Michael, obviously very happy to talk about his life project. Things like wildfires, atmospheric pressure drops, floods, small earthquakes, anything. After looking in the rear view, I saw that Judith was staring at Michael with interest. She seemed passionate about what he was saying. I still felt this flowery smell, even though we were driving fast. Could it be that it was her perfume? What Michael means, she started, is that if there is a forest fire in the next days, more people will die in the region. Car crashes, domestic incidents, gun violence, anything, right, Michael? He seemed surprised that she understood it better than I did, but was ecstatic that she got this right. Yes, exactly. And it happens a lot. Not every time, but quite often. I'd say about 5% of the time such a weather event has a risk of causing deaths. And the rise is significant. Like dozens more people die in the following weeks, sometimes hundreds. That sounded awfully close to conspiracy theory to me, and I don't like these geeky talks. However, the kid seemed smart enough. Maybe he was exaggerating, but maybe there was an ounce of truth in what he was saying. After all, atmospheric pressure has an influence on the brain or something, right? I don't know, I'm asking. And you, Judith? I asked, starting to be annoyed by that girl. What do you do for a living? She had a soft laugh. I wanted to hate that girl, but somehow, I found that cute. I was a scientist once, but I lost my job. One of my eyebrows went up. How could she already have a career, and a scientist, and lost her job? This kid probably didn't even finish university yet. She was obviously bullshitting. Yeah, right. I half muttered to myself. Oh, you were also a scientist? What were you doing? Asked Michael, way too eager as usual. Poor kid still did not learn how to see when people lied. Judith took a deep breath, as if to remember a time long past. She seemed nostalgic, even though I knew it to be a lie. I was a chief consultant at a lab, even though, and I'm not bragging, I should have ran the damn place. It was a time where being a female scientist was harsh, however, so I was happy of my position. I'm no scientist, but one of my friends is a biologist, and I know for a fact that such a time was long past. She was again lying in our faces. Damn this Judith, I thought. On her profile picture, she seemed like a nice, quiet and hardworking girl from a good family. Now she was this flower-smelling, sharp-teethed punk. I was about to put her back in her place when Michael asked, "And what were you working on? Where were you posted? Public or private?" She chuckled. I realized I was sweating. Temperature was good in the car. I was even feeling pretty cold. But here I was, the wheel feeling slippery in my hands. It was like having a fever. Except, I didn't feel bad. Actually, I was feeling pretty good and happy now that I think of it. "It was both public and private," answered Judith. "I was working for an old organization. Shortly after the end of World War II, the newly created United Nations wanted to take the fight back to the plains. That's what my organization and my lab was working on. A device to open a pathway to the plains, allowing for an invasion force to get through. Humanity had always been on the defensive. After the Nazis consorted with the order to use planar creatures as weapons, the UN felt it was time to focus mankind's attention to winning the war against the plains." That was one large bit of information. I looked at that girl, who was probably high as fuck, even though she did not appear so. I was flabbergasted by the monologue she had just unleashed. I barely understood half of what she said. I have great memory and hearing, so I quickly repeated to myself what she had said. But it did not make any more sense. "What?" was all I managed to say. Michael was making a weird face. He was just as confused as I was. "Yeah, I heard that theory deep in the dark web. That's BS, miss." Mike and I exchanged a look. This was going to be a long trip. We were about halfway through. Probably better not to say anything to make her upset. "That's fascinating, Judith," I calmly articulated. "I'll need quite a few minutes to digest the information." In truth, I just needed the silence. Michael too, obviously, as he restrained himself from saying anything. I felt a bite in my neck, some sort of insect. My hand crashed on my skin as fast as I could, but I did not catch it. Damn summer mosquitoes. "You don't believe me, Paul?" she said, using my name for the first time. "But almost everyone lost someone in this war. Even you." I shook my head left to right as anger started to rise in me. I'm always calm, or at least try to be, but it doesn't mean that girl wasn't really starting to annoy me. Silence was golden here. "Like your ex-wife, Joanna." My blood froze. A drop of sweat fell in my eye, distracting me from driving. Someone honked behind my car. "The fuck did you say?" "Your wife was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Judith was dead serious. She was staring at me from the rear view. "They said it was a car accident. They showed you her crushed body and you believed them. Truth is, she was in the way of an incursion by the plane of Earth." I'm not sure how I felt at this moment. A cocktail of mixed feelings. I did feel that this truck really ran her over badly, but never asked any questions. I was angry at this Judith. I felt the sadness of loss again. I was confused at what she said. Not wanting to hear anything more from her, I closed myself to all conversation. Michael tried to call my name a few times, and I just looked at him, made a no with my head, then continued forward. I stopped listening to anything they said and turned the radio up. Michael seemed afraid at first, but once he saw I was just upset and not crazy, he eased up a bit. After a while, I heard Mike and Judith talking again. He was asking something about where she pretended to work, how the device was supposed to operate, scientifically speaking, what were the conditions there. She was answering every question without hesitation. Not that I cared. I didn't know what trick she used to learn about my ex-wife. But for me, that was it. My job was to drop them both at Griffiths Air Force Base, and that was exactly what I was about to do. I drove for quite a while longer, letting them talk about their scientific gibberish. I did not recognize most of the words they were using. While driving, I realized that I felt much more focused than usual. Was it the anger? It felt as if adrenaline was flowing in untold quantities in my blood. I kept sweating heavily even though I felt fine and my air conditioner was working at full capacity. That's when I heard Michael say something that caught my attention. "Wait a minute, Judith," he said in a shaking voice. "What you are describing is Area 51. That got me out of my weird, daydreaming focus. I looked in the rear view to see Judith smiling with all her disgusting teeth. Except, they weren't so disgusting now. I thought to myself that the tattoos on her thighs and neck seemed to have changed their shape, even though I could not be sure at all. I have good memory for words, not for images. "Yes, Michael, I am," she said in a singing voice. Even though it went by a different name then. They called it Fort Retribution. Always liked pompous names. That was too much. I was not going to let her abuse this kid's credulity with lies and twist his head with her delirious ideas just before his job interview. I was still mad for her trick about my wife, even though it must have been a simple Google search. "Even your mother wasn't born when you started to build Area 51, Judith," I growled beneath my teeth. "Don't try to make Mike believe anything else." She stared at me with round eyes. For the first time I saw genuine surprise in her eyes. She muttered something to herself, visibly shocked. "I admire your strength of mind, Paul. I really do," she hissed in a voice that wasn't as pleasant as before. "There are not many like you." I gave a quick look to Michael. He had turned his body entirely towards Judith, his back towards the road. He was drinking her every word. What happened then?" asked slowly, enthusiastic to know more about this girl. "Well," she continued, "once the device was operational, they gathered 3 divisions worthy of infantry. The Inquisition gave the order to start the invasion, and we opened the gate. They chose the plane of life as their first target." Not understanding what was happening, I felt compelled to believe her. Images appeared in my head in flashes, as unwanted memories that could never have been mine. I saw underground corridors and huge underground staging areas full of soldiers. I saw men I didn't know shaking hands, looking at me, saying things I did not hear. I closed my mind to these images. This could not be. I definitely caught a fever and was getting delirious. We were not far from the base, and I would simply take a good nap after I delivered these 2 kids. My day was done. Looking at Mike, I saw that his eyes seemed empty, changing direction from time to time, as if he was looking at something beyond the confines of the car. Was this hippie girl spreading her drugs in my car? The flowery smell had disappeared. But the Inquisition was betrayed. The plane of life was waiting for them, said Judith, as a sense of dread filled my chest. And the UN force could barely make any gain before they were pushed back into Fort Retribution. We could not close the portal which we called the Rift for another 20 hours, and the base was being invaded through it. Now, I started to hear sounds, gunshots mostly, and screams. Horrible, horrible screams. I tried to shout, to pull over on the side of the road, but my body did not obey to me anymore. I internally gasped in horror. It was as if a part of me had decided to continue driving, and another part really wanted to just stop and run away from the car. Was I becoming mad? How did the planars know the Inquisition was coming? Slowly asked Michael, visibly enthralled by the story. I managed to control my eyes long enough to give a quick look at him, and a huge smile was written on his face. For a long time, the Inquisition believed one of their own had betrayed them, said Judith after a long sigh. She sounded genuinely concerned by this. Or that a remnant of the Order did out of spite. Truth was, the director of the Gate project had been infected by the Plane of Life and was a sleeper agent, unknowingly doing their bidding. The Inquisition only discovered sleepers existed decades later. This was new at the time. The signs on the road started to indicate where to go to join Griffiths Air Force Base. I didn't have a choice about where to go, but that's where I wanted to be anyway. The soldiers would help us arrest this girl and find out what the hell she was doing to us. Some kind of drugs? Hypnosis? Why was she trying to implant this false story in our heads? Judith continued her story, apparently happy to have an audience, no matter how non-responsive. I felt like my sister's puppet when we were kids. She would talk to them hours long about her boring stories of princesses and teapots, and I would pray for the poor toy who would die of boredom if it were alive. I needed to find a way to close the gate. A prototype nuclear generator was powering the base, and if we could stop it, the rift would collapse on itself. I took an elite squad of plane-touched soldiers with me, people who had been exposed to planar radiation and survived, developing supernatural abilities. I felt my throat itch. To my horror, I heard my own voice echo in the car, even though I did not order it. On the good side of things, it was exactly what I would have said if I were free of movement. That's just the plot of Avengers, ma'am. Michael turned his head to me. His eyes were still empty, from what I could see, even though it looked as if he were slowly regaining his thoughts. Small groups of gifted individuals go way back in history, before the Inquisition was even created, he said slowly. I felt that even though that was his voice, it was not the kid's words. Or to the old gods of antique religions. We were arriving close to the Air Force Base now. I couldn't wait for us to arrive and be free of this spell. Judith explained how she crossed the underground base of Fort Retribution, being invaded by the Plane of Life. I will not say what she described and the images I saw in my head. Tidal waves of primal goo flooding the corridors. Scientists eaten by half-organic walls. Vegetal hounds hunting for survivors. Veteran soldiers begging for death that would not come. That's when, she said with renewed excitement, we arrived at the nuclear generator. A creature unlike I had ever seen was there, sucking on its energy. It was the first herald ever to arrive in our world. A creature of perpetual renewal, it looked as the skeleton of a putrid horse, until the moist of the room aggregated around it, creating its nerves, its many eyes. The soldiers tried to shoot it, but the wounds healed so fast. It decayed, became old and withered before melting on the ground. Its bones reorganized themselves as a lizard this time, and nerves appeared again. It jumped on my escort, slaughtering them. Horror gripped me. I felt the terror that must have been felt by that scientist. The absolute disgust and primal fear that this thing of entropy and renewal must have brought upon her. If I still had any control of my body, I would turn around and throw up. I managed to get past the thing, continued the red-haired girl. Thanks to the sacrifice of the soldiers, I arrived at the generator, entered my emergency shutdown code, turned my key, and I was blasted away by pure life planar energy. That's how I became plane touched. As the Air Force Base became visible in the distance, I managed to take a look in the rear view. Judith was there, smiling, visibly satisfied of herself. Was her story finally over? What happened then? Asked Michael, eagerly. Did Fort Retribution hold? It didn't, said the girl without an inch of emotion. I'm pretty sure I saw her tattoos move beneath the edge of her sundress. The entire base fell. The creature spread throughout the desert. The plains of Nevada around Fort Retribution saw thick jungle sprout in a matter of hours. Luckily, the rift closed itself after 20 hours. Still, it took a nuclear bombardment. Testing, and weeks of fighting for the Inquisition to reclaim the area. After the battle, the entire sector was closed for Air Force testing, with Area 51 being exactly where Fort Retribution once stood, taking vigilance over the barely closed rift and the planar radiation-soaked ground. As we arrived at the gates of Griffiths Air Force Base, I was only a spectator as my body drove the car away from the check-in place. I unwillingly parked a bit further away. Not long after, 4 soldiers came out of the checkpoint, guns at the ready, aiming at our car, asking us to identify ourselves. At last, we were saved. Michael was still stupidly staring at Judith, who opened the doors and went out. Empty open hands first. With huge struggle, I managed to take back control of my voice for a second. How'd you get out? I managed to mumble angrily. Oh, was it really what I wanted to say? Or was my mind playing tricks again? Out of Fort Retribution, you mean? How did I escape when no one else did? Judith was halfway out of the car when her head turned to me, visibly surprised for the second time today. A half smile appeared on her face, and she looked at me with a paternalistic expression, the kind of which I had never seen. I didn't. She stepped out of the car, going towards the guards, saying she came on the order of a general whose name I did not hear. I felt warmer a few seconds after she left. I managed to turn my head to my right, where I could see both Michael in his seat and the soldiers talking to Judith. The kid was getting back his spirits, breathing heavily. Above us, more and more fighter jets were taking off, getting information before heading west. I saw a flight of bombers, high overhead. The whole base was on lockdown. People were getting deployed. A whole convoy of troops were getting inside. I saw the 4 soldiers take a step back from Judith, then another, before they were shaken by small convulsions. A few seconds later, the soldiers were coming towards the car, Judith closely behind them. Michael shook his head, then started to look around, visibly confused and terrorized. What did she do to us? He asked, his voice broken by anguish. What is going on? It is going to be alright, kid, I said, as reassuringly as I could. I could control my voice as well as my body again. Don't try to resist now. They would. A guard opened the door on Michael's side. Poor kid jumped in his seat out of fear and reflexively tried to get away, even though he was blocked by a seatbelt. The soldier was not looking directly at us. His eyes were staring at nothing. I will need you to come with us, sir. The kicks and punches and protests of Michael didn't change anything. He was not physically well built and was dragged screaming inside the base. 2 pairs of fighters flew right above our heads, the sound of their engines drowning the voice of Mike for a few seconds. Judith came back to the car to close the door. What will you do with him? I asked her softly, out of breath. What is it that you want? The kid is too smart to be left out there, she said after a quick chuckle. I might need him later. He was a side bonus. I needed to come here anyhow. Might as well make sure I get this guy. He can be useful. As for you, you may go. Stay alive. I might call you soon enough. She was about to close the door when I shouted, "What the hell is going on?" This came from the bottom of my heart. I was confused, a tear in my eye, not understanding nor believing what I saw. "Here?" she asked, pointing at the aircrafts taking off and getting information before heading west. Something is happening in Montana. Something big. The plane of shadow opened itself a rift. And it looks like that's not the end of it. I don't trust your armies or the Inquisition to do what is necessary. One of the guards called for her. They were getting inside the base. Judith gave me a smile, her bright yellow eyes shining under the burning sun. I can't let another plane ruin what I spent decades to prepare. I'm going to have a chat with some higher ranks here. There are a few friends from life that I would like to see released from custody. She shut the door closed, walking away. I could barely hear her voice between the jet engines and the shouts of soldiers shutting down the base. Your guys in Montana will need all the help they can get. Human or otherwise. The police car siren was the first thing that woke me up. Living in a small town, I was not used to hearing it in the dead of night. I grumbled something not very pleasant towards our peacekeeping force, then tried to put myself back to sleep. I was having a very vivid nightmare, so in a way it was a good thing that the patrol car took me out of it. Now I could try to dream about something pleasant. That's when I heard the siren a second time. This was unusual. Something was definitely happening in town. I thought I'd just hear about it in high school in the morning. A third car came down my street. But this time, someone was talking in a large speaker. Hearing the tone of the man made me realize it was for sure not an advertising for an upcoming circus performance. I forced myself to wake up, took my head out of the pillow and instinctively looked at my phone to check the time. It was 2:30 a.m. But that is not what caught my attention. I received a text from a 2-digit number. 98. Probably something official. Follow military instructions. This is not an exercise. If you have firearms, take them. Take 1 flashlight per person minimum. Leave your house now. Stay close to light sources. What the hell did that mean? Was that some kind of joke? I've heard about some official alert message guy making a mistake in Hawaii. Maybe that was it. Some prank. I heard helicopters flying above our town. Now that woke me up. This never happens. Our little valley town of about 23,000 inhabitants was not a place of trouble. We gave all the attention and problems to the city of Missoula, way south, beyond the Indian Reserve of Flatheads. I opened the window of my bedroom and saw that there was about a dozen helicopters in the air, some pointing flashlights around the city as if looking for something, some landing in the parking around the town's casino. There was some noise outside my room. My parents were awake, and I saw the light of the corridor flowing under my door. They were a little bit on the paranoid side, wanting nothing else than a quiet life, and so were already packing. I let go of a long yawn, watched a large military transport plane land in the small airport south of our house, and started to get dressed. 20 minutes later, we were in the streets. The night was still very dark despite all those helicopters in the air. All the neighborhood was up and walking, following the police officers that were directing us to the mall. My dad tried to ask a couple of questions to the officer, but he was as confused as us. Apparently, the police station got a call not long before us and had to hurry to get in gear and take the people to the staging area from which we would be brought to the southern mall. There we would be safe. Safe from what? Jonathan? I turned around, looking for the person calling my name. It was Sophie, a classmate that was also a neighbor. Apparently walking up was much harder for her than it had been for me, looking at her face. I made a joke about it that didn't get the result I expected. She just yawned to my face, threw a casual insult, and went on with the conversation. Do you know what's happening? I shrugged and shook my head. Nothing more than that weird text saying to stay in the light. I admitted. Maybe something happened at the Canadian border? Maybe a terrorist attack? Maybe I was interrupted when 4 military jets flew in low altitude right above us, going north at full speed. The sound was deafening, and I saw my mom along with many others protecting their ears with their hands. I tried to follow the lights of the planes with my eyes, but they disappeared not long after. Our city is a valley going from north to south, so if they were following it, it was easy to guess where they were going. Few smaller towns. Then, the Canadian border. I felt my heart stop for a second when I heard detonations way up north. This was not an exercise, just as they said. These planes just bombed something. I looked at my parents with shocked, open eyes. Are the Canadians invading? I asked, not believing what was happening. Nobody could tell us anything. We just kept following the police officers. Military trucks were going north, up our suburban streets. And every time they came, we stepped on the side of the road to let them go. It was weird enough. But when combat transport vehicles started to go alongside regular tracks, people started to whisper. Are we at war? Whispered a mid-aged lady, visibly frightened. My eyes caught Sophie, who was distraught. She was stepping away from her parents and seemed very nervous, with tears forming in her eyes. What's up? I asked her, trying to sound as casual and reassuring as possible in this crazy situation. It's Margaret. She was spending the night at the casino with some friends. Margaret was Sophie's older sister. I did not like her. She was too much of a wild party girl. Not that I want to sound like a boring suburban high schooler. So, she can join us directly at the mall, right? Sophie tried to make something with her mouth that sort of looked like a smile. A tear went down her cheek. I don't know. We tried to call her. It goes directly to voicemail. I heard someone saying the military are using the casino as headquarters. Maybe she didn't go out in time. Maybe... I don't know. Oh my God. She started to cry, and I hugged her. I tried to say a few good things to make her feel better, but I've never been good at this kind of thing. Even my hug was not that great, since we needed to keep walking while hugging. Listen, let's go there real quick, pick her up, and direct her to the mall. Deal? She looked up at me with teary eyes. I could see the judgment in her eye. Are you stupid? There are so many soldiers there. So what? I gave her a real smile, just as a couple of Apache attack helicopters broke formation west from us and went north at great speed. They are on our side. Plus, if there are so many soldiers, we'll be safe there too. It was not a great plan, but I really thought it would be fine. In the worst case scenario, they would catch us and send us on the way to the mall. We were kids, right? It would not take a lot of time. I asked a neighbor friend to tell my parents that I'd go with Sophie real quick to pick up her sister, and that we'd all meet at the mall. If I told them directly, my dad would just catch me and carry me on his back to make sure I'd stay with them. The large group of neighbors arrived at a military checkpoint. Soldiers were there, taking command from the police officers. Everyone was given a distress flare and military-grade flashlights by soldiers, and then got inside a truck, headed directly to the southern mall I guessed. One thing that caught my attention: one of the soldiers at the checkpoint was not in regular army camouflage. He had a black and red uniform that seemed more high-tech to my unexperienced eye. I mean, I kinda like to know the name of military hardwares, but I don't know much about uniforms. The man was there, standing on a Humvee, giving orders around, making sure that everyone got a flare and embarked in the trucks. The crowd started to mass in front of the checkpoint. That was our chance. Let's cut through the Robinson's garden to get around the army. Sophie looked at me as I was saying my stupid plan. From there, we can go straight for the casino. And that's exactly what we did. Away from the group, we plunged into the dark of the suburban gardens. To the distant north, more explosions came. I looked into the skies and saw nothing except the very pale moon and some black clouds. The skies were pitch black. Some funky lights were coming from the valley up north. Was that the result of the bombing? Or some weird thunder? "Don't you feel it is cold?" asked Sophie. I didn't pay attention until now because of the adrenaline. But yes, it was freezing, much more than what was usual for such a summer night. Yeah, I feel it. Plus, that damn wind won't stop blowing. It's not even going in the... I stopped instantly. I realized something that froze the blood in my veins. In our town, the airport was a big source of jobs, and I wanted to be an air controller. Lots of useless trivia I knew about our airport. One of them, it was built to follow the wind, in order to help pilots take off with the wind on their back. And that wind was always coming from the north, going south. Not tonight. The wind is blowing north. It just won't stop blowing. Sophie stared at me with round eyes. I could read the incomprehension on her face. "It never happens," I whispered while shrugging. "If you're trying to scare me, Jonathan, let's just turn on the lights." Sophie was taking her flashlight out of her pocket, but I quickly pushed it away. "No, the soldiers will see us. We can't make any noise." A huge rumble came up from our left, on Main Street. We both crouched and tried to see from behind the fence we were hiding behind. Columns of Abrams battle tanks were going north at great speed, towards the casino. The whole goddamn army was deploying in our town. I was about to offer to maybe go to the mall, when Sophie started moving again. "Okay, let's hurry. I don't want to be here a minute more than what is necessary." We walked 10 more minutes. Fighter jets kept going north to bomb God knows what. More and more troops arrived, be it by helicopters, transport planes, or coming up from Route 93. I was acting tough in front of Sophie. But in truth, it was terrifying. I swear I saw the shadows of a couple kids while we were crossing the gardens. They were going straight to the east, probably also looking for a way inside the casino. Maybe Margaret's friends? They did not see us, moving fast away from us. I would have called them out if I weren't so frightened to be hurt by the patrolling soldiers around us. Our terror switched to stupefaction once we arrived at the casino. The entire casino area had been turned into a fortress. Defensive position had been erected. Snipers were on the roof. Tanks were in the parking lot. Everyone was looking north. On the roof of the casinos, huge light projectors were being installed. I don't know the exact name of these things, but you know the thing that is used for the bat signal? That sort of thing. Hiding in a backyard, we tried to look for a way in. We failed. Soldiers were patrolling everywhere. With helicopters not high above us, it was difficult to hear what any of them were saying. Most of them seemed confused, scared even. I guessed that they didn't know either what to expect. Or at least, not completely. Most of them looked very nervous, and I didn't want to risk them reflex shooting us because we were trying to sneak in their backs. A squad of 4 black and red soldiers came not far from us. Same advanced uniform as the one coordinating the evacuation effort. They also seemed stressed, but were staying away from the bulk of the troops. I made a sign to Sophie to stay silent, and then try to focus to hear what they were saying.
Any refugees coming from the north?
Asked the soldier to their squad leader. To my surprise, he had a strong foreign accent that I sort of recognized as East European. None. They couldn't run away in time, said the man leading the unit in a cold, harsh tone, before pointing to the roof of the house to our right.
Put Karl, Mikael and Frederick up there. If HQ falls, they'll cover the retreat. Any news from Tomohiro's unit?
The whole group stopped, not 5 feet from our position. We were standing in a bush behind a fence, still as a shadow, holding our breaths.
The fences at the Walmart are up,
said a man carrying a large computer-looking device on his back, connected to his helmet through wires.
He will try to delay them, but that won't make us gain much time.
Silence fell for a few seconds, before the 4th soldier, a woman with a Texas accent, asked,
"Why are we setting up here? It's not a great defensive position."
"First, we don't question orders. You know this," answered immediately the squad leader.
"And second, this is the last town before the valley opens up. The last bottleneck before these things can get out of the valley and spread to the flatlands. We have to hold the line until the other households have regrouped and counterattacked."
More seconds of heavy silence. I couldn't hold my breath anymore and started breathing as discreetly as I could. The squad of black and red soldiers started to move away.
"We just have to hold the night? They'll be weaker in the daylight, right?"
asked the man that was previously worried about refugees.
"If they can close the rift. Otherwise,
dawn will never rise again on this region." They kept talking while walking the outskirts of the casino fortress. A series of powerful explosions rang from the north. This time, much closer to our city. It jump-scared me like thunder. Gunfight erupted in what I knew was the direction of the Walmart, north of the city. It sounded like a huge firefight, or it was just a lot of soldiers shooting at something. The helicopters above us broke formation, taking altitude while launching volleys of rocket towards an unknown enemy. The fighter jets were now dropping bombs not 20 kilometers away from us. Even though we weren't that close, we felt the aftershock and the heat waves. Something unlike anything I felt before.
"Let's go through the sewers,"
I offered.
"We'll be safe there, and we can reach the casino that way."
"I'm not going in the sewers," shouted back Sophie.
"No way. Absolutely no way."
A rain of huge rockets flew above our heads from way south, headed straight to the valley in the north. Way on my left, I saw the shape of a huge twin-rotored helicopter getting away from the combat zone. It was spiraling out of control. I didn't see what was causing that, but after 10 seconds of spiraling fast, he just plummeted to the ground. Screams started to rise from beyond the casino as firefights erupted everywhere.
"This whole place is turning into a war zone,"
I said to Sophie.
"I'm all up for not going into this fortress, but at least let's take the sewers to get away. It'll be way faster. I've seen it in movies."
Sophie was utterly terrified. She did know what to do. I could guess she still wanted to save her sister, or join her parents, or mine, or anything. She didn't know what to do. I just wanted to get the hell away from whatever was coming, out of town.
"Let's wait a few minutes,"
she offered.
"Maybe it'll calm down. Maybe they'll win."
We waited for about 10 minutes. The battle was now in full swing. I didn't know what was going on. We went a few streets south from the casino, hidden in another backyard, not far from where we could access the sewer. It was like being in the middle of a huge fireworks show, except the fireworks were 1,000 times louder. However, it wasn't bright at all, and if not for the sound and shockwaves, we could have thought the town was peaceful. I took the opportunity of having a bit of time to write everything on my social media. More helicopters crashed all over town as more convoys of troops and vehicles arrived, deploying their infantry in the streets around us before heading to the fighting in combat formation. We were staying hidden as all of this happened. The winds started to grow ever stronger, and the light of the moon was getting paler and paler, until we could barely see anything apart from the explosions. The light was going away somehow. Even the screen from my phone seemed dimmed, as if critically out of battery.
Incoming! Take positions!
I heard one of the soldiers not far from us shout to his men. Then it hit us. Cold grasped my body as all the light of the streets went out. In an instant, I couldn't see anything more than 10 meters away, except the dimmed flashes of soldiers' weapons firing. Sophie looked at me, utter terror in her eyes. I took out a flashlight from my pocket and turned it on. It barely helped, but it was something. I saw something moving not far to my right and pointed the lights towards it. It was nothing, just shadows dancing with shadows. Far to my left, the soldiers were screaming, screams of horror and pain. Whatever was happening, they were losing. I kept praying that somehow our army would turn this battle around, that this, whatever it was not the end of the world, that we would survive this. What I did not know at this moment was that the mission to stop this nightmare had already happened, that this was led by an elite force beyond my imagination, and that they had already failed.
Okay,
said Sophie, crying.
Let's try the sewers.
We waited 2 additional minutes till the firefight around us got less intense before going for it. Then, we heard an inhuman howl. Something almost insectoid and rocky. It sounded as if it came from the other side of an auditorium, echoing beyond us and then back.
Let's go!
I shouted to Sophie, taking her hands as we were running towards the sewer entrance, ready to enter the darkness below.
If anyone received this, my name is Frank Carver. I'm a pilot for United Airlines and was co-pilot for flight UA-343 from Denver to Seattle. My plane was hijacked. Many are dead, and we have no way of getting back control. We're now in northern Montana. Something terrible is about to happen. Report this to the US military and get them to shoot down our plane. Don't try to save us. It is too late. Shoot down the plane before they can finish their ritual.
It seemed that tonight would be a quiet night for me though. Yesterday evening, I had just landed at Santa Fe after a long flight, and my plane was refueling when some minor technical difficulty meant that we would not be moving for at least 12 hours. Not enough time to visit the local nightlife, but enough to have a good sleep. I was about to leave the pilot's lounge when an assistant came to me. Visibly exhausted, she tried to smile to me. "Captain Carver, I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir, but you received a priority request. Flight UA-343 needs a co-pilot. You've been requested by name because of your extraordinary records." I raised an eyebrow. First of all, I was already quite tired and happy to go to sleep. Also, I did not have extraordinary records. I did my job without mistake, but did not do any overtime or was displaying any excessive zeal. I'm a good pilot, don't get me wrong, but nothing to be noted. "You need a co-pilot?" I asked calmly with my sweetest voice. "Then maybe you can take my co-pilot, Jose Whitaker. Great guy, looking to prove his worth. He would love to do that. I can call him right. Captain Myers asked for you." These 5 words from the assistant stopped me right then, with my mouth still open. Now, you might not know this name, but Myers is a legend in the company. He actually owns a non-negotiable share of the company, comes from a family of pilots. His great-great-grandfather is said to have been in the inner circle that launched the company and made it what it is today. For me? I asked, unable to believe it. Captain Myers is here and asked for me? He did, sir. Now, if you would like to follow me. There was nothing I could say. I could not refuse this and hope to keep my job. And even if I did keep it, I would curse myself till the end of the world for refusing such an opportunity. I stood up and followed the secretary until the plane entrance. The whole cabin crew was there, listening to the captain talking. Probably a joke, as the corridor erupted in laughter when we got closer. Myers noticed us a few seconds later, his blue eyes pale as the glaciers in the mountains on top of the world. He was considerably taller than me, at the very least 2 meters, and built like a goddamn Terminator. While his muscles and nerves seemed carved in iron, his arms and legs were unusually long, giving him an almost avian appearance. The guy was meant to fly. "Captain Carver," he said while offering a handshake. "Pleasure to meet you. Shall we?" He pointed towards the plane with a movement of his head. I looked outside and was surprised to see a heavily customized 737. Something deeply out of regulation. Almost looked like a prototype in some way. I heard about this new version, but did not know it was operational. "Is this?" I whispered, afraid to ask the question. "It is," answered Myers with a large smile. "I wish to give you a full tour, but we're already late. My usual co-pilot disappeared 6 hours ago. Very strange of him. It flies exactly as your off-the-mill 737. Good for you?" I nodded. 737s are what I fly most of the time. One thing that made me nervous though. Myers mentioned his usual co-pilot. Now, you might not know that, but commercial pilots don't choose their co-pilots to avoid a whole lot of problems. That he could fly with his usual co-pilot crewing plane meant a level of autonomy unheard of in our company, and probably in any charter in the world. Also, when he mentioned that his friend disappeared, the crew shuddered. Not just worry. They were outright scared. I could almost feel the shiver down their spine, which made me shiver in return. They knew something I didn't. No reason for me to worry more than necessary at that moment. But that was my first warning. I wish I had listened to my guts. Good. Now let's get flight ready. We are yet to discover a world that waits for the late. The passengers embarked not long after. Families, couples, businessmen, all that you could expect for night flights. Even a group of friends obviously going on a bachelor party. We saluted each of them before they joined their seats, and we took off not long after. The first part of the flight was without issue, so I won't talk much about it. I tried to start a conversation with Myers, but he always answered with 2 words maximum. I eventually asked him why he chose me specifically, which actually made him laugh. "Your last name. My family knew a Carver. Maybe we are related. Could be fun." That is all I could get from him. Not pushing my luck any further, I kept my attention on the flight, making sure not to make any mistake. Everything was going smoothly when we received a radio call from a weird frequency. Not the usual radio talks that we receive all the time from various control towers. This sounded almost like white noise. After a few seconds, I realized it sounded like wind. A picture appeared in my head of wind blowing in a rugged black rocked valley with an impossibly white sky above it. I shook my head, blaming it on my sleepiness, then noticed Myers was staring at me. He seemed to try to judge me with his eagle eyes, then pushed the button to answer to the radio frequency. To my surprise, he whistled. The most beautiful whistle I had ever heard in my life. radio went blank for about 20 seconds. Then, an extremely high-pitched voice came to life. It sounded as if whoever was talking on the radio was blowing on the radio the whole time and hissing.
Shadow moves. Hold the rift. Do what you must. Coordinates follow.
I looked at Myers, incomprehension probably visible on my face. I was about to ask him what the hell was that, when he said, "We're changing course, Frank. No questions asked." He seemed sincerely sorry and concerned. He opened an internal channel with the cabin crew leader, a charming lady called Margaret Turner. "Mac, the flock will be spent. Get ready." Something was obviously happening. When the captain started to change direction, heading now entirely north, I had to act. "Captain Myers, my apologies, but if we must change course, we must inform. We will not inform anyone. I'm sorry you have to be a part of this. Stay ready if anything happens." His voice was not inviting any kind of answer. I was thinking of a better way to reformulate my opposition to this legend of a man when Margaret came inside the cockpit. She lost the permanent smile that seemed printed on her face. Her eyes were cold and calculating. "So this is it," she said in a low voice. "Where are we going, sir?" Something was happening here that I did not understand. The respect I had for Captain Myers had delayed me, but I would not stay silent in front of this. The whole life I spent as a pilot was against this kind of unexplained change of course. "The coordinates received are in northern Montana." I started with anger brewing in my voice. "But I won't let this plane go there without knowing why or without informing ground control, even if you give the order, Captain Myers." Both the captain and crew leader looked at each other. Then Myers sighed, a long tired sigh. He slowly shook his head, muttering something to himself. "You want to know what is going on? All right. Turner, show him." I looked at Margaret, not really feeling reassured, waiting for her to do some kind of trick, pull out a map, secret instructions, anything. Instead, she went to the door of the cockpit, opening it. I could see the main corridor. Most passengers were asleep. My eyes caught Margaret's gaze. "It's in the cargo hold," whispered Margaret. "Please follow me and be quiet." After a few seconds of hesitation and a last look to my station, I stood up and followed Turner. The rest of the cabin crew was on the war foot. While the corridor was asleep, all the crew was working at full efficiency, preparing God knows what. I did not focus to see what buttons they were pressing or what box they were opening, but I was shocked by how silent they were. It was like if air didn't move when they were half running from one side of the plane to another. That's when I heard Margaret softly whistle. It was almost impossible to hear in the constant noise of the plane, but two crew members answered by a different kind of whistle. I understood at that moment. This was a code, and that something was happening now. Were they terrorists? Some sort of crazy suicidal cult? I had to do something. I looked around at the faces of many passengers. Were there some air marshals in there? It was pretty much my only chance. I didn't care if I was making a mistake or being paranoid. Regarding the circumstances, I would be forgiven once we hit the ground for sure. What if they were taking me somewhere to execute me? All of a sudden, I shouted at the top of my lungs. "The crew is hijacking the plane!" I did not have time to finish my sentence. Margaret turned around lightning fast and struck me with a powerful blow to the side of the head. I fell on a nearby passenger who was still sleeping, losing consciousness before I could see any kind of reaction around. When I woke up, the whole plane was silent. No whispering. No one watching a movie with minimum audio. Nothing. I realized I was sitting in a passenger seat, and that my back was wet somehow. Slowly opening my eyes, I looked around. Everybody was awake now, looking absolutely terrified, and the crew patrolling back and forth was now openly carrying knives, and for some handguns. "You are awake," said Margaret Turner, who was coming back from the tail of the plane towards the cockpit. "I hope you had a pleasant sleep." She was staring at me, disgust on her face. I tried to say something, but my tongue was swollen, and I barely gargled something. She snorted. "Because of your little bravado, we had to take control of the plane by force," she grunted. "Killed the 3 air marshals, as well as 14 passengers who tried to fight back. Are you proud of yourself?" I looked behind me, beginning to understand why my back was wet. To my horror, the seat on which I was sitting was soaked in blood. I felt nauseous and looked back at Margaret in anguish and incomprehension. "Why?" I managed to articulate. She didn't bother to answer, starting to walk again towards the cockpit. She just added, "Now, be a good boy and stay there. We'll call you if we need you." I looked around confused. Other passengers were looking at me with absolute terror in their eyes. I took a few minutes to process what was happening. We were flying straight towards northern Montana, I thought. The bodies of the dead marshals and passengers had been taken care of, as only stains of blood remained in the corridor. I heard a loud slapping noise behind me. A woman screamed in pain and surprise, and other people gasped. "No talking," I heard a crew member shout. I had the worst headache and took my head between my hands for some time, trying to ease the pain. It took some more minutes before I noticed a man to my left, on the other side of the corridor, trying to get my attention. The man looked in his early 40s, well built, but nothing remarkable. Definitely a Mr. Nobody at first sight. He took a piece of paper in his hand, waited that no crew members were around, and then showed it to me. It was all written in capital letters, very clearly. Having good eyesight, it was easy for me to read it, even if there was a bit of distance. "No talk. They hear all. Here to help. Need you." I was flabbergasted for a second. Was he also an air marshal? Didn't look like one. I shrugged, shaking my head. I had a lot of questions, but without paper on my own to answer, I could just exaggerate my mouth movement without making a sound, so he could read on my lips. How? He was obviously ready for this question, for he took another paper on which he had already written something. A crew member walked the corridor between us, looking at me on the way, so we both waited everything was clear before he showed me the sheet of paper. "Kill Captain. Pen in ear. 1 strike." The plane shook a bit. We were in a turbulence area. It only lasted for a few seconds, but I felt shook to my core. To kill Captain Myers? How would I reach the cockpit? Why kill him? And if the crew kills me in retaliation, who would fly the aircraft? Our priority was to save the passengers, not doom us all. Looking back at the man, I pointed him with 1 finger. Again, not making a sound, but trying to make him read my lips. "Who?" The man was not happy with this question, made a weird face, and then directed my attention again on the paper, asking me to kill Myers by thrashing a pen in his ear. That was a weird way to kill someone. The man turned around the paper. Something was written on the back. "Ear, only way to be sure to kill it." The mention of it somehow froze my blood. They were terrorists, madmen, but for sure they were still people. For some reason, part of me believed that something else was happening here. This was also unreal. A few hours ago, I was preparing to get a good night's sleep. I pointed him again, asking who he was. Visibly upset, he took a new piece of paper. With infinite care not to make any sound, he wrote 1 word for about a minute before showing it to me. Inquisition. That was it. This was all a bad dream. What the hell did that mean? Were everyone here getting crazy? Maybe a hallucinatory gas in the ventilation system? All that was happening could not be. How could I even get to the cockpit anyway? The cockpit door opened violently. Margaret came out, almost running in the corridor, looking at me. I don't know what came to my mind at this moment, but I discreetly took a pen from the seat back in front of me, putting it in my pocket. Turner was visibly preoccupied by something. "Frank, come in the cockpit. Now." I stared back at her, determined not to let me be bullied. "Why? What is happening? I won't do anything without an explanation." She pulled out a handgun, probably stolen on an air marshal's body, pointing directly at my head. Now, I lost my shit. It was the first time someone was threatening me with a gun at such close distance. I felt air leaving my lungs, stopping from moving. My skull was itching, as if I could feel the barrel. I nodded and got up. She took me to the cockpit, where Myers was in the middle of a conversation on the radio. I don't know who he was talking to, but he was incredibly focused. His voice was soft as honey. As I said, my co-pilot Frank Carver will soon fix this mechanical issue. Once done, we will be able to change course. We'll be very quick. Please, we have a lot of people here. Margaret showed me the co-pilot seat before pushing me on it. She leaned forward to whisper in my ear. "Tell them all is repaired and we will change direction. We need you to give us 1 minute." I supposed I looked like a confused toddler, not understanding the conversion, while she handed me a headset in one hand, still keeping me at point blank with the gun in her other hand. "This is Frank Carver, United Airlines Flight 343. All is fixed now." Siegfried Myers immediately and quietly stood up and walked out of the cockpit towards the tail of the plane. What was going on? I took a look on the radar and noticed with horror that other aircrafts were following us. Mixed feelings were rushing in my brain. Someone noticed we had been hijacked and had sent military planes. At least, we caught ground control's attention. What was very unusual was that there were not 2 jet fighters, as protocol commands, but 4. And they weren't just regular planes too. They were stealth fighters, broadcasting their position so we would know they were behind us. Our radar would never pick them up otherwise. What were 4 F-22s doing behind us, in Wyoming, so little time after we got hijacked? "United Airlines 343, this is your final warning," said a woman's voice on the radio. "You are entering restricted area. Turn around or you will be shot down. You have 30 seconds. This was horrible. I was going to die in 30 seconds, either from an Air Force missile or from a bullet at the back of my head. Why were they so vehement on shooting down a plane before we could correct our course? Why was northern Montana off limit? What the hell was happening? Please, wait, just give us a bit more. 20 seconds. Change course now." I was starting to turn around when I felt the weight of my 737 shift. It was as if something incredibly heavy just appeared inside the plane. When you're an experienced pilot, you can feel this kind of thing. Just as if you know when you drive a car, when one of your luggage just swings around to left to right, you know. Something weighing few tons was now in the cargo hold. Turner put her left hand on mine, still keeping me at gunpoint, preventing me from changing course. He is out. A red signal beeped on the control panel. An alarm signal. It simply said, "Cargo door 2 open." 10 seconds, said the female pilot voice in the radio. "May God watch over your souls." "I'm sorry. Wait." I felt the back of my plane shaking heavily. It was impossible, but it felt as if. "UA-343, you have something on your hull." "Holy mother of... what is that thing?" It was like being a spectator to an unfathomable horror. What now? I felt like falling in an elevator. What to do? Will I die? What was happening? I turned to Turner. She was smiling. The plane felt lighter all of a sudden, as if Whatever was on the hull just jumped away. I heard a scream in the radio. On the radar, all 4 F-22s went back to stealth mode. What wasn't stealthy though were the missile barrage they unleashed. To my surprise, they weren't aiming for us. I stared at the radar screen, watching the volley of missiles fly in every direction, trying to hit something behind me. This was when the first explosion happened. Did they hit whatever was attacking them? A second explosion. I tried to look behind me through the glass to no avail. I saw a couple of missiles, few times faster than me, passing us on our left, having visibly missed their target. I also noticed some high-caliber bullets being fired in quick succession, also obviously missing their target. The pilots were using everything they had. I was paralyzed by fear. I considered fighting back against Margaret, who was focused on the radar. But something told me it was a fight I could not win. On the radar, 2 objects appeared, quickly losing altitude. I was trying to understand what it was, when the impossible answer popped in my mind. It was a stealth fighter that, all of a sudden, had lost all stealth capacity. It had been cut in 2. The female voice on the radio screamed. This time, on an open distress sequence. Was it a mistake? A button pushed in panic? Or was she trying to warn me as well?
This is Warlock, leader. My flight is down. I need... Oh Lord, he is on me. He is on...
Indistinct screams of pain and horror came in the radio for a dozen more seconds, before an F-22 popped into my radar. It was spiraling out of control, as if it had lost its aerodynamic capacities, or if there was no pilot inside. Not long after, the several tons heavy weight went again in the cargo hold, before disappearing almost instantly. The alarm signal indicating one door was open stopped beeping. I kept flying towards our destination in northern Montana, barely capable to speak. Margaret had a soft chuckle before leaving the cockpit. Just before closing the cockpit behind me, she added, "Steady as she goes. It will be over soon." I looked around for something useful. Calling for help would not be of any use, it appeared. But that was all I could do. Something terrible was happening here, and I had to make it stop. As we flew further into Montana, I noticed the moon becoming paler and paler, and somehow, the obscurity of the night increased. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like someone controlled my eyes as if it were a screen, and that someone lowered the luminosity setting. The temperature stayed the same, but I started to feel cold. I found a PDA hidden under the co-pilot seat. It was connected to the internet somehow, and had a very soft soundproof membrane around it. How convenient, I thought to myself. Why would the co-pilot have something like this here? Not wanting to take any chance, I put the PDA in my pocket. 2 seconds later, Myers pushed the cockpit door, coming inside. Immediately, I looked at him. He was quite pale, smiling. Was that meat and blood around his mouth? Good work, Carver. I knew it was a good idea to keep you alive. He sat back at the captain's seat, immediately taking control. He started diving, quickly lowering the altitude of the plane. We plunged into the clouds. I heard Margaret shouting at someone in the corridor. "It's a shame what's happening, really," started Myers on the tone of the friendly conversation. "All these years of hard work, only to have it thrown out the window because another plane became a little too greedy." I did not understand what he was talking about. Was he trying to befriend me? In that case, only one thing to say. "You don't have to do this, Siegfried," I began. "We can still..." "Don't think you know me, Carver," interrupted the captain. "Or the reasons why I do this. If it can make you feel better, know that our sacrifice will save a lot of lives, actually." Was that a bluff? Why would he say that now? He looked at me with eyes as piercing as those of a hawk. "You see, Carver, something bad happened in Montana. You would call it terrifying, actually. Usually, first responders can take care of it. Not this time, though. I shook my head slowly. Was this guy also part of this Inquisition? The crew were a bunch of brutal murderers. Why was Myers messing with me? So, you'll tell me you're the good guys? That you killed the marshals and passengers out of goodwill? And those pilots? What happened? I'm not saying we're the good guys. Myers interrupted me once again. I'm saying we have a common enemy on this. Your Inquisition could not succeed. This time, for whatever reason. And now, there is a rift open right here, in the middle of the States. There is no hiding that anymore. I had a lot of questions. So many. Was he bullshitting me to make me cooperate? I thought about what to say next for a while. But before I spoke, he pointed something to my right. I didn't see what he was showing, even though I have great eyesight. He was fixed, staring at something that not even the radar picked up. Well, what have we got here? Said Myers, while quickly opening a map of the continental US with one of his hands. He read it for a moment, seemingly incredibly focused. Was he making mental calculations? Just what I thought. He finally added. Transport aircraft convoy, straight from Area 51, heading for the Flatheads. He pushed a button, opening an internal transmission to the crew. The plane of life is playing its hand. Seems like they have the same idea as us. They're already going to the south of the rift. Margaret answered, her voice echoing through the cockpit. Judith? That shape-shifting bitch is again trying to control everything. Oh, how I hate life. Myers seemed shaken by that name. Usually he is still as a statue, but I could feel he was not comfortable there. She is not our enemy either, Margaret. He said as gently as possible. And she probably found a way to make a truce. They are escorted by Air Force fighters, and they are headed straight to a little town south of the rift where the whole goddamn army is deploying. The Inquisition is probably trying to stop the flood there. I looked at the map, trying to understand what the hell they were talking about. Myers had accelerated the plane way beyond the maximum speed a 737 is supposed to have. I considered the pen in my pocket. Was it my chance? Was it really the best thing to do here? Now? To try to kill him? I'll stay in the cargo hold, ready to act. Told Myers. But I need you to stay here. I'll lock the trajectory and communications. But if someone calls on the radio, you have to bullshit them long enough so we can reach our destination, after the Canadian border. Can I ask you to do this, Carver? Now, he was asking me a favor. How could he trust me with anything? I was a prisoner here. Did he count on my survival instinct to not ask anyone approaching to shoot us down? Margaret will prepare the passengers for. Well, I'll lock the cockpit so you stay here. Don't make me call Mark and ask her to shoot you, okay? He stood up, ready to leave. It was my last chance to try to kill him. I felt the pen in one of my pocket, the PDA in the other. And then, it occurred to me. I was about to stay alone for a while in the cockpit. What? What after we arrived there? I asked Myers. And then we call for backup, and we hold the line. He smiled at me and entered a vocal command and locked down navigation and radio control. This custom 737 had a damn Siri installed. Myers left, locking the cockpit behind him. I stood, came closer to the door, and heard him talking to Turner. Prepare the flock for the ritual. We're running out of time. We'll do it mid-air. Knives only. I sat down in horror. Whatever they had in mind was going to be horrible. What kind of sadistic, sacrificial ritual were they planning? How could I stop them? So, here I have been since, frantically typing on my stolen PDA, trying to get my story out. I don't think anybody can stop this plane now. Not the Air Force, not the Inquisition passenger. and certainly not me. In a few minutes, we will be at the rendezvous point that was given by the hissing voice over the white noise on the radio. I hope someone hears this. If you hear this, you probably know more about what is happening in Montana than I do. Hopefully, what information I give will help. May the Lord above have mercy on us all.